5 children died in the village over the course of a single winter. No one knows why. Some say it's evil spirits. Others say it's the wrath of the gods. But he looks at the pigs lying 10 paces from the well and realizes that the killer is the water everyone drinks. And he is the only one who can prove it. But first, let's go back 4 days. The cold strikes before consciousness. Icy water squeezes his chest. Air bursts from his lungs. His eyes fly open into the darkness. Salty water lashes his mouth and nose. His hands won't obey him. A wave engulfs his head and hurls him downward. Rocks dig into his ribs. His back is scraped raw to the flesh. He doesn't know which way is up or down. He doesn't know who he is. He knows only one thing. It's cold. The next wave tosses him into the shallows. His fingers dig into the rocks. He crawls. He just crawls forward on all fours like an animal. His mind is blank. Only instinct. Don't lie down. Don't die. Someone's hands grab him by the shoulders. Rough, smelling of fish. Someone is shouting. They drag him up the shore. Then smoke, fire, darkness. For 3 days he burns in the heat. Someone's hands give him bitter broth to drink. They wipe his forehead with a wet rag. He curls up into a ball and whimpers. And then, on the second day, he opens his eyes and sees the ceiling. Low, black with soot, and his brain kicks in before his memory does. The ceiling is black. That means an open hearth with no chimney. That means carbon monoxide. That means everyone in this house loses 10 years of life simply because they breathe. The thought flares up and dies out. The heat drags him back into the darkness. On the 4th day, he wakes up for real. A woman is sitting by the hearth. She's grinding herbs in a stone mortar. Thin shoulders, dark blonde hair in a bun, and his brain reads her like a textbook. The mortar is stone, so metal is rare here. The herbs are unmeasured. The effect is random. The woman's hands are red, cracked until they bleed. No soap. She washes everything with lye and ice-cold water with her bare hands, and she holds her shoulders a certain way, slightly inward, as if protecting an empty space from what was taken away. Her child died. He doesn't know where this thought came from, but he's sure. And then his memory returns, not in bits and pieces, all at once, like a flash of light in a giant library where every book is in its place. He remembers everything. Chemistry, page by page, the pharmacopoeia, epidemiology, the composition of gunpowder, blueprints of a blast furnace, the mechanism of a water wheel, 14 patents, 3 divorces, 0 friends, death at his desk at 3 in the morning, an aneurysm. A brain that didn't know how to stop finally stopped. And here he is, naked, sick, alive, in a strange world, and inside, it's quiet. No panic, no fear. Something old from those days when he was 22 and a blank slate lay before him. So, starting from scratch. He knows how to start from scratch. He turns his head, asks her name. The woman flinches. Gray, tired eyes. Her name is Mara. He asks to see her hands, takes her palms. Hot, cracked and chapped. And he doesn't see hands. He sees a world where women age twice as fast, where at 29 they look 40. He leans back and says, "I need ash and fat, and a cauldron." Mara looks at him as if he's crazy. A naked stranger washed ashore by the sea 4 days ago asks for ash and fat. But she brings it. Maybe because his voice doesn't sound like a request, like a fact. By evening, an old man enters the house. Broad-shouldered, his face is like oak bark. His name is Garth, the village elder of Brynholt. His sons pulled Aiden out of the water. 23 households, 140 souls, fishermen. Winter is harsh. An extra mouth is an extra mouth. But the sea doesn't wash a man ashore for no reason, and Aiden's brain is already working. No wall, no blacksmith, no doctor. Children die in winter. Taxes take a third of the catch. The Baron doesn't care. This is rock bottom, absolute rock bottom. And Aiden looks around and sees not poverty, he sees raw materials. Wood, clay, stone, a stream. There are hands here. He'll fill the heads himself. He tells Garth straight, no gold, no weapons. But there is knowledge. And he knows how to make sure the children don't die of diarrhea in the winter. Garth's face doesn't change, but his hands clench on his knees. Last winter he buried his 2-year-old grandson. Diarrhea, fever, 3 days. Garth stands up. He utters a single word, tomorrow, and he leaves. On the 5th day, Aiden gets to his feet and sees Brynholt in daylight for the first time. Crooked huts, windows covered with bull bladders, mud up to the ankles, and pigs. Pigs lying 10 paces from the only well. Their manure runs straight down to the stonework. That's it. That's why the children die every winter. Not the cold, not hunger, water. A boy stands in the doorway of the nearest hut, pale, swollen belly, eyes too big for his face, parasites, dirty water. And for the first time in his entire life, Aiden feels that his knowledge is truly needed. An hour later, he sits by the chieftain's hearth. Next to him are Garth and his 3 sons, broad shoulders, suspicious eyes. Aiden speaks plainly. Children don't die from evil spirits. There are creatures living in the water so small that the eye cannot see them. They get into the water with the manure. People drink. The creatures get inside and start eating from the inside. Diarrhea, fever, death. The eldest son, Bran, smirks. It sounds like a fairy tale. Aiden looks at him calmly. He asks how many children died last winter. Bran falls silent. Garth answers quietly. 5. And Aiden says, do as I say, and not a single one will die next winter. Garth looks him in the eyes for a long time. Then he asks what to do. Aiden lists the steps. Move the pigs away from the well. Dig deep latrines far from the water. Always boil the water before drinking. Wash your hands before eating. And he'll make what they need to wash with. Bran grumbles that it's a mountain of work and winter is just around the corner. Aiden replies, or mend the nets and dig 5 more children's graves in the spring. Your choice. Bran turns crimson. Garth puts a hand on his son's shoulder. He utters a single word. Dig. On the 6th day, work is in full swing. The sons move the pig pen to the far end. The pigs are unhappy. So are the people. It's hard to change what you're used to. But Garth spoke, and the village obeys. 4 men dig pits in the stony ground. Aiden stands nearby and gives orders. A depth of 1.5 times a man's height. Reinforce the walls with poles. A roof on top. A trench around the edge so the rain doesn't wash the filth into the soil. The stranger knows the exact dimensions of a shit pit. They don't understand everything, but they dig. On the 7th day, he makes soap. He sits by Mara's hearth, weak. His hands are shaking. But his mind is working. Mara brings sifted ash and a piece of precious lard. Aiden dictates every step. Pour water over the ash. Let it steep. Strain it. You'll get lye. Caustic. Don't touch it with your hands. Melt the fat without overheating it. Pour the lye in a thin stream. Stir. Don't stop. The temperature is important. Mara's hands move confidently. 2 hours later, there's a thick, dirty white mass. They pour it into a mold. It sets over 2 days. On the 9th day, Aiden takes out a rough gray bar. He cuts it. He hands it to Mara. Wet your hands, rub, rinse. Mara rubs the block between her palms. A sparse gray lather. She rinses it off and looks at her hands. They are clean. cleaner than they have ever been in her life. The dirt has washed out of the cracks, the smell of fish is gone, and in the evening she goes out to the sea and stands alone. The wind tears at her hair, and she cries. For the first time in 3 years, not out of grief. On the 10th day, Aidan walked through the village from one end to the other for the first time. His legs were still buckling. Mara walked beside him, silently. She didn't offer support but stayed within arm's reach, ready to catch him if he fell. He walked and looked. 23 houses. Each he examined from the outside. He counted. Walls, roofs, windows, chimneys. Or rather, the absence of chimneys. Not a single house had a chimney. Smoke from the hearth rose and escaped through a hole in the roof, or simply pooled under the ceiling. People breathed this in every night, every winter, their whole lives. He stopped at one house, peered inside through the open door. A family, a man, a woman, 4 children, all in one room. A hearth in the middle. Smoke drifted under the ceiling like fog. The youngest child was coughing, constantly, a dry, hacking cough, chronic bronchitis from the smoke. This child is about 5 years old. If nothing changes, by the time he's 20, his lungs will be like those of a 60-year-old, if he lives to be 20. Aidan walked on. He saw a woman washing rags in the stream downstream from where the boys had watered the horses. He saw an old man sharpening a knife on a stone. The knife was poor quality. The iron was soft. The edge wouldn't hold a sharpness. He saw a smithy, or rather, a shed with an anvil. The anvil was made of stone, not iron. Stone. A man stood nearby, huge, hands like logs, black with soot. He was striking a red-hot piece of metal with a hammer. Strike, strike, strike. The iron bent, but not the way it should. The temperature was wrong. The man didn't know what it should be. He didn't know that the color of the metal indicates the temperature. Dark red, cherry red, light red, orange, yellow, white. Each color is a range, each range for its own operation. The man struck at random, like his father, like his grandfather, from generation to generation. The same mistakes. Aidan stopped and watched. The man noticed him, looked up, gloomy, wary. It was Tolben, Brynholt's only blacksmith. Aidan told him his workpiece was too cold for forging. Tolben looked at him like he was a fool, replied that he knew his own business. Aidan nodded and walked on. It's too early. The blacksmith can wait. Water first. First, people need to stop dying from drinking their own waste. By the evening of the 10th day, he had mapped out the entire village in his head. Every house, every well, every path. The terrain, the slope of the land, the direction of the wind, where water pools after rain, where the soil is clayey, where it's sandy, where rock comes to the surface. All of this was in his head, orderly, precise, like a blueprint. He sat down in Mara's house and asked her for a piece of charcoal. Mara gave it to him. He took a flat stone and began to draw. The village from above, houses, a stream, a well, the shore, the forest. He drew and explained to Mara what he was doing. Mara watched. She had never seen a map, never seen how the place where she lived could be drawn on a stone. She watched and recognized her home. Garth's house, the smithy, the shore. Her eyes widened. She pointed and said, "Here's the path to the spring." Aidan nodded and added the path. The spring. He asked if it was far. Mara said it was a 15-minute walk uphill. He asked if it dried up in the summer. Mara said no. The spring flows from the rock, always. Aidan looked at his sketch. The spring in the hills, above the village. Clean water from the rock, uncontaminated. If we run a ditch from the spring, no, a pipe, a closed-type wooden trough, down the slope, to the village. Clean water will come on its own. No buckets, no well with dirty water. A water supply, the simplest kind. No pumps, by gravity. It's a month's work with 10 people, but the result will change everything. He set down the coal, looked at Mara, asked how she was feeling. Mara was taken aback by the question. No one had asked. Here, they didn't ask how you were feeling. Here, they asked if you were alive. She said she was fine. Aiden said she was lying. He said he could see how she was holding her right hand. The joint was inflamed. It hurt her every time she grinds something in the mortar. Mara pulled her hand behind her back, instinctively, like a child hiding a broken toy. Aiden said he wouldn't force treatment on her, but that he knew how to reduce the inflammation. Hot compresses, willow bark decoction. Willow contains a substance that relieves pain and inflammation. Mara was silent, then quietly asked where he knew all this from. Aiden remained silent. What could he say? That he was from another world? That he had died and woken up here? That there were 4,000 books in his head? She would decide he was mad, or possessed, or sent by evil spirits. He said he had studied a lot, for a long time, with good teachers, far from here. Mara accepted this, not because she believed it, but because she didn't care where the knowledge came from. What mattered was that it worked. The soap worked. Her hands were cleaner than ever. That was enough. On the 12th day, Aiden began to teach Mara. For real. Not just isolated instructions, a system. He sat with her every evening by the hearth and spoke. He told her about invisible creatures in the water and in the dirt. About how illness is not a curse, but an infection. That infection is transmitted from person to person through dirty hands, through water, through flies that land on filth and then on food. Mara listened. Sometimes she asked questions, good questions. She asked how these creatures were made, how big they were, how to kill them. Aiden answered. He explained that boiling kills them, that soap washes them off the skin, that cleanliness is not a luxury but a weapon. Mara memorized it. She had a tenacious memory, not like his, human, but tenacious. She repeated his words in the evening and retold them to the other women in the morning. Aiden noticed this. Mara was his first student, and she taught others. A chain. He teaches Mara. Mara teaches the village. That's how it should work. He is alone, but knowledge must become shared. On the 14th day, the first test came. The wife of the fisherman Kearns, named Ida, went into labor. It was a difficult birth. The baby was in the wrong position, feet first. The local midwife, the old woman Bridget, did what she could, and she could do very little. She yelled at the woman in labor, pressed on her stomach, shoved some herbs into her mouth. Mara called for Aiden. She came running, pale, said that Etta was giving birth and that things were bad, that the baby wasn't coming out, that Bridget said if it didn't come out in an hour, the mother would die. Aiden stood up. His hands went cold. He knew obstetrics. He knew it from textbooks. He could recite it page by page. Breech presentation, the love seat maneuver, the Morisot-Lèvres-la-Chapelle maneuver. He knew what movements were needed, what turn, what angle. But he had never delivered a baby in his life. His hands were the hands of an engineer, a programmer, an entrepreneur, not a doctor. He was walking toward the Kearns house, and his hands were shaking. He went inside. The house was dark and hot. It smelled of blood and sweat. Etta was lying on a bench. Her face was pale. Her eyes were rolling back. Bridget stood nearby. Her hands were covered in blood up to the elbows. Dirty. Aiden looked at her hands and said the first thing that came to mind. He told her to wash her hands with soap. Right now. Bridget stared at him. Then she started screaming that a man had no business being present at a birth, that it was unclean, that he would curse the child. Mara stepped between them. She quietly told Bridge to wash her hands. Her voice was such that Bridge fell silent. She washed them. Aidan approached Ida. He forced himself to breathe evenly. His hands were shaking. He placed them on the woman's belly. He felt for the baby's position. Breech. One leg bent. Everything just like in the textbook. Except in the textbook, it didn't smell like blood. In the textbook, the woman wasn't screaming in his face. In the textbook, his hands weren't shaking. He spoke, calmly, steadily, as if he were giving a lecture. He told Mara to hold Ida's hands. He told Bridge to hand him clean rags. Only clean ones. Boiled ones. Bridge wanted to object. Mara looked at her, and Bridge didn't object. Aidan worked. Slowly. Carefully. He could feel the baby through the wall of the abdomen. He guided it. A turn. Clockwise. Gently. Don't press. Guide. Ada was screaming. He didn't hear her. The whole world had narrowed down to his hands and what they were feeling. The minutes dragged on. The baby turned. The head was in the right position. Aidan stepped back. He told Ida to push. Ida pushed. Mara held her hands. Bridget handed him the rags. The baby came out. A girl. Blue. Not breathing. Aidan took her. Tiny. Slippery. Hot. He turned her face down, cleared the mucus from her mouth with his finger, patted her back. Once. Twice. 3 times. Silence. 4 times. A cry. Faint. Then louder. The girl started breathing. She turned pink. She kicked her legs. Aidan held her, his hands shaking, more than they had before the birth. He handed the baby to Bridget. He sat down on the floor, right on the dirt floor. Mara crouched down beside him. She didn't say a word. She just sat there. Aidan was breathing. He looked at his hands. They were covered in blood, someone else's blood, for the first time in his life. He thought of all his patents, all his startups, all his conferences, all his awards. None of them were like this. None weighed as much as this cry, this first cry in a dark hut at the edge of the world. They bandaged Aidan, gave him water. They washed the baby. With clean, boiled water. Soap, Aidan insisted. Bridget grumbled, but did it. By morning, E was asleep. The girl slept on her chest. Kearns stood at the door and couldn't speak. He had come from the sea at dawn. He'd been told his wife had nearly died and that a stranger had saved them both. Kearns looked at Aidan. He knelt before him. Aidan told him to stand up. Kearns didn't stand up. He said his daughter would bear the name Aidan chose. Aidan was silent. He looked at the girl. Tiny, pink, fists clenched, eyes closed. He said to name her Ada, simply because she was the first person he had saved in this world. Kearns nodded. Ida. From that morning on, a new word appeared in the village. Healer. The stranger had become a healer. On the 16th day, Aidan returned to soap making. The first batch was small, a single bar. Mara distributed it in small pieces to the women. They needed more. They needed a system. He sat down with Mara and explained the entire process again, in more detail, with the proportions, with temperature controls. Mara couldn't write it down because she didn't know how to write. She memorized it, repeated it aloud, sped through every step. Aidan corrected her. 3 days later, Mara made the second batch on her own, without his instructions. 4 bars, bigger, cleaner, better. She was proud of it. She didn't say anything, but Aidan saw, by the way she carried those bars to the table, carefully, like something precious. By the 20th day, every family in the village had soap. Women washed their hands before cooking. Children washed their hands before eating. Not everyone, not always. Habits changed slowly, but they changed. Aidan didn't push. He waited for the result. The result was the best argument. A week after everyone had soap, Ordinary diarrhea in 3 children. People used to die from that. Aidan made a solution. Salt. Honey instead of sugar. Boiled water. The simplest oral rehydration. He gave the children drinks every hour, in small sips. 2 days later, all 3 were healthy. The mothers looked at Aidan with new eyes. Before that, he had been a stranger with soap. After that, he became the man who had saved their children from dying. That evening, Mara stood at the door of her house and watched Aidan. He was sitting by the well, explaining to a boy of about 7 why he should wash his hands. He seriously, as if to an adult. He spoke of tiny, invisible creatures. The boy listened with his mouth agape. Mara watched this, and something shifted inside her. Something heavy, something old, something that had been there for 3 years, ever since she buried her daughter. She remembered that night. 2-year-old Nora, diarrhea, fever, 3 days. Mara gave her herbal teas. She asked Bridget for help. Bridget told her to pray. Mara prayed. Nora died on the 3rd morning. Little, warm, quiet. Ever since then, Mara had lived on half volume. She boiled herbs, she treated cuts, she helped her neighbors. But inside, she was empty. And now a stranger sat by the well and taught the boy that dirty hands kill. And Mara knew with terrible clarity. Salt, honey, water. 3 things. 3 things she had in her house when Nora was sick. If only she had known. 3 things. Mara quietly entered the house. She closed the door. She pressed her back against the wall and slid to the floor. She sat there. She didn't cry. It was worse than crying. It was empty and full at the same time. Then the door opened. Aidan stood in the doorway, silently. He looked at her. Then he sat down next to her, on the floor. He didn't touch her. He didn't offer words of comfort. He said quietly that she couldn't have known, that no one here could have known, that this knowledge hadn't yet been born into this world, that he would teach her everything he knew. Mara looked up at him. Her eyes were gray, wet. She said she wanted to learn, so that never again, not a single child. Aidan nodded. He said that was exactly why he was here. On the 21st day, Aidan began building a water pipeline. More precisely, the people began building it. He stood and spoke. His body was still weak. 3 weeks in this world and he had only just begun to walk normally. His muscles were soft. His breath would catch after climbing the hill. But his mind worked like clockwork. He climbed up to the spring with Bran and 2 men from the village. He surveyed the spot. The spring gushed from a crevice in the rock face. The water was clear, cold, odorless. He tasted it, slightly mineral-like, no iron aftertaste. Good. The slope from the spring to the village was perfect, gentle, even, as if someone had deliberately shaped this slope so that the water would flow down it by gravity. Aidan stood on the hill and looked down at Brynholt, a small, dirty village on the shore of the gray sea. Smoke rising from the roofs, dogs barking, seagulls squawking. And he saw something else. He saw what wasn't there yet. A trough from the spring, clean water in every house, a bathhouse, a laundry room, vegetable gardens on terraces. He shook his head. Not now. Right now, the trough. He explained to Bran what was needed. Long tree trunks, straight, thin, split them in half, remove the core. That would make half pipes. Join them end to end. Lay them along the slope from the spring to the village. Cover the top with boards or bark so dirt wouldn't get in. At the end in the village, place a stone basin. The water would flow constantly. Bran listened. He scratched the back of his head. He said it was a lot of work. Aidan said it was. But that once it was ready, the women wouldn't have to go to the well. They wouldn't have to haul buckets. The water would come on its own. Clean. Bran thought about it. He asked how many men it would take. Aiden said 10. For 20 days. Bran whistled. 10 men for 20 days is a lot for a village of 140 people. That's fishermen who won't go out to sea. That's a catch that won't be made. That's mouths that still need to be fed. Aiden understood. He'd thought about it. He said they could work in shifts. 5 men from 5 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon, the rest of the time at sea. Bran nodded. That made more sense. The work began. The men chopped down trees, thin, straight pines from the forest behind the village. They split them in half. They carved out the wood from the inside with axes and chisels. The work was rough, slow. The tools were poor. The chisels were dull. The axes lost their edge after every dozen blows. Aiden watched this and gritted his teeth. We need good steel. We need decent tools. We need a blacksmith. We need Tolbin. On the 23rd day, he came to the smithy. Tolbin was working, striking with a hammer, as always. The same sound, the same rhythm, the same result. Soft iron, crooked nails, dull knives. Aiden stood in the doorway and watched in silence. Tolbin noticed him, didn't turn around, kept hammering. Aiden waited. Tolbin finished, threw the workpiece into a bucket of water. It sizzled. Turned to Aiden. Tolbin flushed, clenched his fists. Aiden continued, calmly. He said the knife was bad not because Tolbin was a bad blacksmith, but because Tolbin didn't know one secret. That if you add charcoal to the iron in a certain way and heat it to a certain temperature and then cool it in a certain way, you get a different metal. Harder, stronger, sharper. This metal is called steel, real steel, not what everyone here calls steel. Tolbin stood there, breathing heavily. His fists were clenched. His face was red. Aiden realized he was teetering on the edge. One more step and the blacksmith would strike him, or drive him out, or both. He chose a different path. He said quietly that he didn't want to offend him, that he could see what a master Tolbin was. His strike was precise. His eye for detail was perfect. His hands were strong and steady. He said that Tolbin lacked not skill, but knowledge, and that these were different things. Tolbin's skill was better than anyone else's in the village. Aiden could provide the knowledge. Tolbin was silent, for a long time. Then he asked what method it was. Aiden explained. Sanitation. You take an iron ingot. You cover it with charcoal in a sealed clay crucible. You heat it. For a long time, many hours. Carbon from the charcoal penetrates the iron. It changes its structure. Then cooling, quickly, in water or oil. The metal becomes hard. Then reheating, more gently, slower. This removes the brittleness. The result is steel, flexible and hard at the same time. Tolbin listened, his fists unclenched. His eyes changed. A hunger appeared in them. The hunger that Aiden recognized. The hunger of a master who senses that his craft can be greater. Tolbin said, "Let's try it." They began that very day. Aiden stood nearby and spoke. Tolbin worked. His hands moved with confidence, with familiarity. He knew fire. He knew iron. He knew the hammer. What he lacked was precisely what Aiden had given him, an understanding of what happens to metal at a level the eye cannot see. They filled a clay crucible with pieces of iron and charcoal. They sealed the lid with clay. They placed it in the furnace. Aiden said to keep the heat high, very high, for many hours. Tolbin nodded. He pumped the bellows. He tossed in more charcoal. The heat in the forge became unbearable. Aiden retreated to the door. Tolbin stood by the furnace. Sweat was pouring down his face. His face was red from the heat. But he didn't leave. 6 hours later, Aiden told him to take it out. Tolbin pulled the crucible out with tongs. He broke the clay. Inside lay pieces of metal. They looked the same. Tolbin picked one up. He placed it on the anvil. He struck it. The sound was different. Not dull as usual. Ringing. Clear. Tolben froze. He struck it again. The same sound. He picked up the piece with the tongs. He held it up to the light. He looked. The surface was different, denser, smoother. He looked at Aiden. His eyes were wet. He said nothing. He turned back to the anvil. He began to forge. Aiden stood and watched. Tolben worked in silence. An hour, 2, 3. By sunset, a knife lay on the anvil. Small, simple in shape. But when Tolben ran the blade along a piece of wood, shavings came off as thin as paper. Tolben ran it along again, and again. The blade didn't dull. He lifted the knife. His hand was trembling, not from fatigue. He had been forging for 30 years, his whole life. His father forged, his grandfather forged, and neither of them had ever held anything like this in their hands. Tolben turned to Aiden. He asked quietly what else he knew. Aiden replied that he knew a lot. Tolben nodded. He said the plumbing tools would be ready in 3 days. Aiden said, "Okay." He left the smithy. He walked through the village in the dark. He was smiling. For the first time since he'd been in this world. Not because the knife had turned out well, but because of Tolben, that gruff, huge man. He looked at his knife and saw that the world could be different. By the middle of the 2nd month, the water system was ready. In the morning, Aiden and Bran opened the last valve at the spring. Water began to flow, slowly. Down the gutter, over the wood, down the slope. After 200 paces, the first joint leaked. Bran cursed. He ran to patch it up. After 400 paces, another one. Aiden waited. He knew that the first run was always like this. Leaks, drips, clogs. Normal. By noon, all the leaks had been patched. The water reached the village. A thin stream. It fell into a stone basin that Tolben had hewn from a single boulder. The basin filled. Slowly. But it filled. The whole village stood around it. 140 people. Children, old men, women, men. They stood and watched as the water, clean, cold, clear, flowed into the stone. On its own. No one carried it. No one drew it. It simply came. From the mountain, down the tree, and settled here. A boy of about 6 ran up first. He held out his palms, cupped some water, took a sip, laughed. Others followed him. Women filled their pots. Children splashed about. Old Bridge touched the water and crossed herself. Hart stood next to Aiden. He was silent. Then he said quietly, he said that in 60 years of life, he had seen many miracles. The birth of children, storms, the northern lights. But this was the first time he'd seen water come on its own. Aiden said it wasn't a miracle, it was a pipe. Hart chuckled. He said that for Brynholt, it was one and the same. By the end of the 2nd month, Brynholt had changed. Not beyond recognition, but for those who lived here, the changes were enormous. The water was working. Clean water stood in a stone basin in the middle of the village. The women no longer went to the well. Latrines had been dug. People were getting used to going there. Not everyone, not always. The old folks grumbled. They said their grandfathers went wherever they wanted, and nothing happened. But Garth said to use the pits, and most people did. 3 women made soap under Mara's guidance, regularly, once a week. Every family got a bar. The children washed their hands, not because they understood why, because their mothers made them. And their mothers made them because Mara explained it. And Mara explained it because Aiden taught her. The chain worked. And most importantly, this year, for the first time in the village's memory, not a single child died of stomach sickness at the start of winter. Not a single one. Usually by this time there were already the first graves. This year there wasn't a single one. Aiden stood by the water trough at sunset on the 2nd month and thought about food. Winter was a problem. The fishing was poor. Grain supplies were meager. Last summer's harvest had been weak, as always. The land around Brynholt was poor, a thin layer of soil over rock. But Aidan knew the land was poor not because it was barren, but because it had been used incorrectly. The same field was planted year after year. The grain drew nutrients from the soil, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. The soil was depleted. The harvests declined. People were starving. And no one knew that the solution was simple: a 3-field crop rotation. One field is sown, the second is left fallow. The third is planted with legumes, peas, beans, clover, nitrogen-fixing plants. Their roots contained bacteria that took nitrogen from the air and converted it into a form accessible to the soil. 1 year of peas, and the field recovered. 2 years, and the grain harvest doubled. But that was a task for spring. Now, it was winter, and they had to get through it. He gathered the men of the village at Garth's house, 23 men, heads of households. He explained crop rotation, simply, without scientific terms. He said that if you plant grain in the same field every year, the soil gets tired. Like a person who doesn't sleep, you have to let the soil rest. And not just rest, you have to plant peas and beans in it, because peas make the soil better. The men exchanged glances. One asked how a stranger knew about the land. He was a healer, after all. Aidan said he knew more than just about illnesses. The man snorted. Another asked what if the peas didn't grow and they lost the field. Aidan said the peas would grow, and that they could be eaten. It wasn't a lost field. It was a field that rested and fed at the same time. Garth listened in silence. Then he said he'd try it on his own field first. If it worked, the others would follow. If not, well, Garth shrugged. He was used to taking risks. Every time he went out to sea was a risk. One more wouldn't hurt. Winter was bearing down. November turned into December. The days grew short. The nights were long. The cold crept into the cracks of the houses. The wind from the sea wouldn't die down. Brynholt huddled. People stayed indoors. They saved firewood. They saved food. They ate salted fish, hard bread, turnips, fish soup made from bones. Aidan was starving too, like everyone else. He didn't allow himself to eat more than the others. He lived in Mara's house. He slept on a mattress by the wall. Mara slept by the hearth. There was nothing between them, only work. Just conversations in the evenings. He taught her, every evening. He told her about the world of invisible beings, about how the human body works, about bones and muscles and blood, about why wounds fester, about how pus isn't bad blood, but the body's reaction to infection. Mara listened. She memorized. She asked questions. Once she asked why women die in childbirth more often than men die from wounds. Aidan looked at her. Good question. He explained. Because during childbirth, dirt gets inside the body. From the midwife's hands, from the rags, from the bed. The infection gets into the blood. A fever sets in. The body burns and dies. If the midwife's hands are clean, if the rags are boiled, if the surroundings are clean, then the infection doesn't get inside. Then the woman lives. Mara was silent for a long time. Then she said that Bridja had delivered her baby, with dirty hands, like everyone else, like always. Aidan said nothing. Some things didn't need to be said out loud. In the 3rd week of December, trouble came. Not to Brynholt. To the neighboring village of Calston, a 2-day walk along the coast. A messenger ran in that morning. A boy of about 12, frostbitten, blue lips, barefoot, one leg wrapped in a rag. He collapsed by Garth's house. They carried him inside, gave him something to drink, warmed him up. He told them, "There's a plague in Calston. Pneumonic fever, coughing, fever. People are falling down and not getting back up. 40 sick out of 120 residents. 5 have already died. No doctor, no priest, nothing. Someone said there's a seafaring doctor in Brynholt." They sent the boy. He walked for 2 days through the snow, almost barefoot. Aidan looked at the boy, at his frost-bitten feet, at his face. A child, 12 years old. He walked for 2 days in the snow to ask for help. Aidan's mind was racing. Lung fever, most likely pneumonia, bacterial. Without antibiotics, the mortality rate is 30%. With basic care, it can be reduced to 10. A warm room, plenty of fluids, mustard plasters, herbal teas, isolation of severely ill patients, ventilation, hygiene. But they had to go. A 2-day journey, in winter, on a road where bandits lurk, and leave Brynholt behind. Everyone tried to talk him out of it. Garth said the road was dangerous. Bran said that Baron Grimm was somewhere nearby and his men were robbing travelers. Tolben shook his head silently. Aidan looked at the boy. The boy looked at him. His eyes were large, wet. They held a hope that a 12-year-old should not have to bear. Aidan said one word: saddle up. They set out at dawn. Aidan, Mara, Aidan's 2 of Garth's sons, Bran and the middle one, Connor. A wagon with supplies, soap, clean rags, pots for boiling, willow bark, honey, salt. Mara had gathered everything overnight. She didn't ask if she could come. She just packed up. Aidan didn't object. He needed Mara. She knew everything he had taught her. She was his hands. The road was rough. Snow up to their knees, wind in their faces. The cart got stuck. The horses slipped. Bran cursed. Connor said nothing and pulled the horse by the reins. Aidan sat in the cart, wrapped in a fur, freezing. He wasn't used to the cold. His body from the old world sat in the warm office, sipping coffee. This body was shivering from the cold and the wind. Mara sat beside him. She didn't complain. She had grown up here. Winter was part of her life. By evening on the 2nd day, they saw Calston. The village was smaller than Brynholt, 15 houses, smoke rising from some. Nothing from the rest. Silence. An ominous silence. A village without the sounds of children is a village in trouble. They rode in. No one was on the street. A man came out of the nearest house. His eyes were red. He looked at them. He asked if this was the doctor. Aidan nodded. The man pointed to the houses where the sick were. Aidan jumped down from the cart. His legs were stiff. He staggered. Mara supported him. They went on. 3 days in Calston. Aidan slept 2 hours a night. He went from house to house. He examined the sick. He listened to their breathing. He checked their fevers. He sorted them. Those who could be saved into one group. Those who were unlikely to survive into another. It was hard. Not physically, although physically too. It was hard to look a wife in the eyes and tell her her husband might not survive. It was hard to decide who to give the last portion of the decoction to. It was hard to be the god he didn't want to be. Mara worked beside him, silently, quickly, precisely. She washed hands, boiled rags, gave the sick water to drink, changed bandages, taught the local women what to do. The same words, the same movements. Wash hands, boil water, isolate the severely ill, air out the rooms. Don't be afraid of the cold air. Cold air doesn't kill. Dirt kills. The locals looked at her with the same distrust with which Brynholt had looked at Aidan a month ago, but they did it. Because people were dying and there was nothing else left to do. On the 2nd day, 2 people died. An old man and a girl of about 4. Aidan stood over the girl's body and said nothing. Small, thin, light hair, just like his former niece from his past life. He remembered the formulas. He remembered the dosages. He remembered everything. But without antibiotics, without an oxygen mask, without an IV. He was powerless against severe pneumonia, knowledge without tools, a library without hands. Mara approached. She said quietly that he had done what he could. Aidan replied that he could have done more, if he'd arrived sooner, if he'd had more. Mara placed her hand on his shoulder, gently, for a second. The first touch that wasn't medical. Aiden froze. Then he went back to work. On the third day, 2 more died. Both were beyond hope when Aiden arrived. The remaining 36 were surviving. The fever was subsiding. The coughs were weakening. People were beginning to eat, to drink, to sit down. By the morning of the 4th day, Aiden gave final instructions to the local women Mara had trained. Boil, wash, isolate, give water, watch. They nodded, memorized. He left them soap, all he had. Promised to send more. They packed up and drove back. Aiden sat in the cart, gray with exhaustion. His eyes were closing on their own. Mara covered him with a fur. He fell asleep. For the first time in 3 days, he didn't dream of anything. They returned to Brynholt on the 4th day. The village greeted them quietly. Garth stood at the gate. He looked at Aiden. Aiden could barely sit up. Garth nodded. He helped him down from the cart. He led him to Mara's house. He laid him down. Aiden slept for 12 hours. When he woke up, Mara was sitting by the hearth. Just like on the first day. She was grinding something in a mortar. But now she wasn't grinding at random. She was grinding willow bark, with precise movements, in exact proportions, for a specific purpose. Aiden watched her and thought that this was his true calling. Not soap, not plumbing, not steel. Mara. Mara, who yesterday had saved lives no worse than a field medic. Mara, who, 2 months ago, didn't know that dirty hands kill. That's what he should be doing in this world. Not building, teaching, not inventing, passing on. He had already created 1 Mara. He needed 100 Maras, 1,000, 10,000. And then knowledge would no longer depend on a single mind. It would become more than him. More than the library in his brain. It would come alive. A week later, a delegation arrived from Calston. 12 people. Old men. Women with children. Men. They had walked through the snow for 2 days. They came and stood before Aiden, on their knees, bowing to the ground. Aiden stood there not knowing what to do. He couldn't stand it when people bowed to him. He told them to stand up. They didn't stand up. He said he wasn't a god, that he was just a man who knew a little more. He asked if they wanted to learn. They did. Garth stood nearby and watched. He saw how 12 strangers had come to his village and asked to be taught. He saw that Brynholt was ceasing to be just his village. It was becoming something bigger. And he didn't know whether to rejoice at this or fear it. Aiden saw it too. He knew that every new person was both a resource and a risk. More people meant more hands to work, but also more mouths to feed, more conflicts, more rumors that would spread farther. The rumor about the healer from the sea was already making its way along the southern coast of Northwald. It was inevitable. And it was dangerous. The 4th month began with guests, not from Calston, from far away. A wagon pulled up to Brynholt at noon, an old one, creaky, a skinny horse, a woman in the wagon, young, red hair, straight back, a stony face. Next to her, a boy of about 10, clinging to her, big eyes, frightened. Both were wearing clothes that had once been expensive, now torn, dirty, but the fabric was fine. The cut was intricate, not peasant clothes. The woman jumped down from the wagon. She looked at the village, at the mud between the houses, at the chickens, at the fishing nets drying on stakes. Her face showed nothing. But Aiden stood by the water trough and saw her eyes. In them was contempt. Subtle, familiar. The contempt of a person who grew up in another world. In a world of stone walls and tapestries and silverware. She approached him. She asked if he was a healer. Aiden said yes. She said her name was Selina de Vere, that she was the daughter of Count Marcus de Vere of Ostrogard, that her family had been slaughtered, that she had been fleeing with her brother for 3 weeks, that her brother was ill, that she had been told they village. Aidan looked at the boy. Theo de Vere, 10 years old, pale. Dark circles under his eyes, breathing rapidly. Aidan approached. He knelt down. He placed his hand on the boy's forehead. A fever. Not high, but there. He looked at his throat. Red, swollen, mild strep throat. Not dangerous if treated. Dangerous if left untreated. It could develop into rheumatic fever, heart damage. He told Selina he would cure her brother, that it would take 3 days. Willow bark decoction, gargling with warm salt water, rest, warmth, food. Selina nodded briefly. Then she asked how she would pay. Aidan said nothing. Selina looked at him, suspiciously. In her world, nothing was given for free. Every gesture had a price. Every favor demanded a return. She said she didn't accept charity. Aidan said it wasn't charity. That once her brother recovered, they would talk. There was work that needed doing. If she was literate. Selina lifted her chin slightly. She said she could read in 3 languages. She knew heraldry, music, court etiquette, history, cartography. Aidan nodded. He said, "Good." Mara would lead them to a warm house. Mara stood nearby and said nothing. She looked at Selina, at her red hair, at her straight back, at her face which even covered in mud and torn clothes was beautiful, noble, in a way that Mara never had been and never would be. Mara led them to her house. She laid Theo down, gave him a herbal tea, covered him with a fur. Selina sat down next to her brother. She didn't leave. Her hand on his forehead, her eyes dry. She wasn't crying. Mara thought that this woman had long since forgotten how to cry, or forbidden herself to. Mara went outside, found Aidan by the forge, quietly asked who this woman was. Aidan said she was the daughter of the murdered count, a refugee. Mara paused, asked if she would stay. Aidan said he hoped so, that he needed a literate person. Mara nodded. She returned to the house. Inside, something small and evil clenched within her. She didn't understand that feeling, or perhaps she did and didn't want to admit it. Theo was recovering. 3 days, as Aidan had said. Willow bark had brought down his fever. Gargling had cleared the inflammation in his throat. The boy began to eat. He began to talk. He turned out to be quiet, polite, smart. He asked questions about everything. What that pipe on the street was, why the water flowed on its own, what that gray stone was that the women used to wash their hands. Aidan answered, patiently, in detail, as always. It didn't matter to him whether a person was 5 or 50. Knowledge has no age. Theo listened with his mouth agape. His eyes lit up. For the first time in 3 weeks on the run, he looked like a child. Selina watched, silently. Her face didn't change, but something inside her began to stir. Slowly, like ice on a river on the first day of spring. When Theo got to his feet, Aidan came over to Selina, sat down across from her, said he had a proposal. Brynholt is growing. Calston sent people. More are coming. We need accounting. How many people? How many houses? How much food? How much soap? How much firewood? What comes in? What goes out? What remains? Without an inventory, growth turns into chaos. Selina listened. Her face remained stony. Aidan continued. He said he knew an inventory system. It's called double-entry bookkeeping. Every transaction is recorded twice. Receipts and expenditures, what we received and what we gave away. That way you see the whole picture. That way it's impossible to lose or steal. That way you can plan. Selina raised an eyebrow, the first sign of life in all these days. She asked if he was suggesting she count fish and soap. Her, the count's daughter. Aidan looked at her, calmly. He said there was no longer a count's daughter. There was a 22-year-old woman, literate, intelligent, homeless, nameless, defenseless, with a 10-year-old brother in her care. And there is a job that can give her all of that. Not because she is noble, but because she is literate, because she knows how to think, because she is capable. Selina was silent for a long time. Her jaw tightened, her eyes flashed. Aiden saw he'd hit the mark, that his words had pierced her armor. Not consolation, not pity. Fact. A stark, hard fact. The countess is gone, but the person remains, and that person has work to do. Selina said she needed a pen, ink, and paper. Aiden said there was no paper. There was birch bark. There was charcoal. It would be enough for now. Selina snorted. Birch bark! Graffinia de Vere keeps records on birch bark. But she took a piece of charcoal, sat down, and began. Aiden dictated. Explained the structure. Left side, income. Right side, expenses. Each line with a date. Each category separately. Food, firewood, soap, tools, people. People arriving. People leaving. Births. Deaths. Selina wrote, quickly, neatly, in beautiful handwriting that betrayed years of training. 2 hours later, she had the first page. She looked at it, at the even lines, at the numbers, at the system. Aiden saw something change in her face. Not a smile, not joy, something deeper. Recognition. She recognized herself. She could do this, not because she was the Count's daughter, but because she was Selina, and Selina knew how to think. The first week with Selina was difficult. She looked down on the villagers, a habit, an instinct. 22 years among the nobility. The peasants were just background to her, furniture. She didn't do it on purpose. She simply didn't notice people of a certain sort. The village women noticed it instantly. Women always notice. Mara heard Brands's wife hiss that the redhead was turning her nose up. How old Bridget said it wasn't proper for a refugee to act like the mistress of the house. Mara didn't say anything, but she thought it. Aiden noticed too. On the 4th day, he walked up to Selina. She was sitting by the house, keeping track of things. Aiden sat down next to her. He said he could see how she looked at the people here. Selina snapped. She said she wasn't looking at anyone. Aiden said that was exactly what he meant. She doesn't look. She doesn't see. To her, these people are nobody. Selina turned pale. Then she blushed. She said he had no right. Aiden said he did, because these people feed her, and her brother, and keep her warm, and protect her, and that each of them deserves to be looked at. Selina stood up. She left. Aiden didn't chase after her. He knew his words had gotten through. They always did. Just not right away. 2 days later, Selina went out in the morning and spoke to Brands's wife for the first time. She asked her name. Brands's wife stared at her. She said, "Dira." Selina nodded. She said she was recording the supplies for each house. She asked how many sacks of grain Dira had. Dira paused. Then she said, 2. Selina wrote it down. She asked how much salted fish. Dira answered. The conversation was brief, dry, but it happened. Selina's first conversation with a peasant woman in her life. Not an order, not an instruction. A question and an answer, as equals. Well, almost as equals. Mara saw this from the doorway of her house. She didn't smile, but she nodded, to herself. By the middle of the 4th month, Selina was keeping track of the entire village. Every house, every supply, every inflow and outflow. The birch bark sheets were stacked in a pile. The numbers lined up in rows. A picture was emerging, and the picture was terrifying. Selina came to Aiden in the evening. She laid the sheets out in front of him. She said that if nothing changed, there would be enough grain until March, fish until February, firewood until mid-March. After that, starvation. Aiden looked at the numbers. He knew. He had a rough idea, but now he saw it clearly. Thanks to Selina, the numbers didn't lie. 140 people plus 12 from Calston plus Selina and Theo. 154 mouths to feed. Supplies aren't enough. Something needs to change. And fast. He told Celine that she had done the most important thing anyone could do. She had seen the truth in the numbers. Celine looked at him, for the first time, without defiance, without a shield. She just looked. She said that Count de Vere had taught her that knowledge is a weapon. Aidan replied that the Count was right. Selina lowered her eyes. She said quietly that her father had never shown her a weapon, only music and etiquette. What if he had? Maybe. She fell silent. She didn't finish her thought. Aidan didn't ask. Some sentences finish themselves. The food problem had to be solved. Aidan thought for 2 days. He walked along the shore. He looked at the sea. He did the math in his head. Fishing was the foundation of Brynholt, but the boats were small, flat-bottomed. They didn't go far from shore. They caught little. The nets were coarse, with large mesh. The small fish got away. He couldn't overhaul the entire fishing industry over the winter. But he could do one thing: canning. Here, they salted the fish, dried it, smoked it, but they did it poorly. A lot of fish went bad. There wasn't enough salt. The smoking was primitive. The fish went rancid after 2 weeks. Aidan knew how to do proper cold smoking. The temperature shouldn't exceed 30 degrees. Smoke from alder or apple trees, not conifers. Conifers make it bitter. Smoking time, at least 2 days. Proper ventilation. Fish smoked this way keeps for months, not weeks, months. He gathered the fishermen, explained. They listened skeptically. Every one of them had been smoking fish since childhood. An outsider was going to teach them how to smoke. But Garth told them to listen, and they listened. Aidan asked Tolbin to build a simple smokehouse, a stone base, an iron grate on top, a chimney to control the draft. Tolbin built it in 3 days. The first batch of fish was smoked under Aidan's guidance. Alder chips, low heat, slowly. 2 days. The fishermen walked by and sniffed. The smell was different, not like their own smoking. Milder, deeper. When they took the fish out, golden, firm, didn't fall apart in your hands. The taste. Hart tried it first, chewed slowly, then looked at Aidan. Didn't say anything, but took a second piece. A week later, all the fishermen were smoking the fish the new way. The fish kept well, didn't spoil. The supply, not enough, but more. Selina counted. She said that with the new smoking method, the fish would last until the end of March. If there weren't any more mouths to feed, Aidan knew there would be. Rumors were spreading, people would come. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, the people of Brynholt were eating fish that didn't stink and didn't fall apart in their hands. And that was a small one, a quiet one, but a victory. In the evening, Selina sat by the hearth in Mara's house. Theo was asleep. Mara was brewing a potion. Selina was counting the supplies. 3 women in one house. They were silent. Each was lost in her own thoughts. Mara was thinking about how her house was no longer just hers, that there were strangers in it now, that a stranger with red hair was sitting at her table and writing numbers on birch bark, and that it was right, even if it made her heart ache. Selina thought about how a month ago she had slept in a ditch by the road, holding Theo in her arms, not knowing if they would live to see morning. And now she had a roof over her head, and work, and numbers before her eyes, and every day has meaning. And that for the first time in a month, she isn't afraid to fall asleep. Mara looked up. She looked at Selina. Selina looked up. She looked at Mara. Nothing was said between them, but something was understood. Both were here because they had lost everything. Both were here because the same man had given them a reason to stay. That night, Aidan sat alone on the shore. He looked out at the black sea. The moon was breaking through the clouds. The waves were roaring. He was thinking. Brynholt was changing. Running water, soap, steel, smoking, accounting. It all worked. But it was all visible. Smoke from the smokehouse, the sound of a hammer from the smithy, the clean faces of the children. Anyone who came would see that the village didn't live like the others. Better, more abundant, cleaner. And they'll want it for themselves. Or they'll want no one else to have it. Baron Grimm. Aidan had heard about him from Garth, a local vassal of Chancellor Storn. He controls 4 villages in the district. He collects taxes. He takes a third of the catch, the right of the first night. A menagerie of rebels in the castle dungeon. A classic petty tyrant. As long as Brynholt was a poor fishing backwater, the Baron didn't notice it. Now, rumors about the healer, rumors about a village where people don't get sick. The rumors will reach him. The question isn't if, the question is when. Aidan sat on a rock and counted the time. He had maybe 2 months, maybe 3. Then the Baron would arrive, with soldiers, and then soap and running water wouldn't help. We need protection. We need weapons. We need walls, or at least a plan. He stood up. He walked back to the village. A list was already forming in his head. A wall, a palisade at the very least, crossbows, simple ones, with a drawstring, long range. Train the men, 20 men, shooting, formation, discipline, traps on the approaches, moats, stakes, engineering defenses. He wasn't a soldier, never had been, but he remembered the textbooks. He remembered the history of sieges. He remembered ballistics. He remembered how a crossbow works, how to the firing sector, how to position archers in a triangle to cover all directions. Knowledge. Knowledge again. No hands, no experience, but with people who could become his hands. Tolben would make the crossbows. Bran would train the archers. Hart would organize the construction of the wall. Everything as usual. He speaks. They act. Only now the stakes are higher. Not dysentery, not hunger. Men with swords, who will come to take everything Brynholt has built. And Aidan, sitting on a rock by the night sea, thought for the first time that he was ready to kill. Not with his own hands, but ready to give the order, ready to position the archers, ready to calculate the bolt's trajectory, ready to make sure a man in chainmail fell from his horse and never got back up. The thought was cold, heavy. He accepted it, as he would accept a formula, as a fact, because if not him, then who? And if not now, then when? Aidan began building defenses the day after that night on the shore. In the morning, he went to Garth, sat down across from him, said they needed to talk seriously. Garth nodded. Aidan said that rumors about Brynholt were spreading along the coast, that sooner or later Baron Grimm would hear them, that the Baron would come, that the Baron would see the water pipes and the soap and the steel in the smokehouse, and that the Baron would want it for himself, or destroy it. Hart listened in silence. His face didn't change. He knew. He had lived 60 years in a world where the strong take from the weak. That wasn't news. The news was that Aidan was going to resist. Hart asked how. Aidan said they needed a wall, a palisade, around the village, logs sharpened at the ends and dug into the ground. A moat in front of the wall. Not deep, a cubit and a half, but deep enough that a horse couldn't jump over it. Stakes at the bottom of the moat. A single gate, narrow, with a bolt. Garth asked how many men and how much time. Aidan said 15 men and 2 months. Hart whistled. 15 men for 2 months. That's the entire fishing fleet at a standstill. The village will go hungry. Aidan said he knew, that they'd have to juggle things, half the day on the wall, half at sea, that the women would take on some of the men's work, gathering firewood, tending the livestock, that children over 10 would help too, carrying stones, mixing clay, carrying water. Hart was silent. He thought. Then he asked, "What if the Baron doesn't come? What if the rumors don't reach him? What if it's all for nothing?" Aidan replied that a wall is never in vain, that it's warmer behind the wall in winter, that the wall stops not only horsemen, but also wolves, and bandits, and the wind from the sea. Garth smiled. He said, "All right, we'll start tomorrow." Work on the wall was hard. Winter wouldn't let up. The ground was frozen. Digging a trench in the frozen ground was torture. The crowbars bent. The shovels broke. The men cursed. Bran cursed the loudest of all. But he dug. Tolben forged staples and bolts. The new steel made the work easier. The staples didn't bend. The bolts didn't break. A small victory of metallurgy over. Aidan walked along the wall under construction every day. He checked. He adjusted. The logs must stand tight. Gaps no wider than a palm. Tapered at the top at an angle, so no one can climb over. The moat must be level. The walls reinforced with poles. Stakes at the bottom. Fill with snow. Invisible. The men listened. They worked. Some grumbled. They asked why fishermen needed a wall. They weren't soldiers. Aidan didn't argue. He didn't try to convince them. He just stood there and waited for them to finish. Garth stood beside him. His presence was argument enough. At the same time, Aidan began work on a weapon. A crossbow, the simplest kind, but with a trigger. Crossbows existed in this world. Rare, expensive, without a windlass, pulled by hand, weak, close range. Aidan knew another kind of crossbow, with a toothed windlass, a crank, a mechanical advantage. Even a child could cock it. The bolt pierces chainmail from 100 paces. This is not a bow. A bow requires years of training. A crossbow with a crank requires an hour of instruction. The perfect weapon for peasants. He went to Tolben, sat down by the forge, began to explain. He drew with charcoal on a stone, the stock, the bow, the lock, the trigger mechanism, the handle, the gear. Tolben looked at the drawings. His eyes burned with the same hunger as on the first day he saw real steel. He asked what the bow was made of. Aidan said steel, laminated, hardened, flexible. Tolben nodded, said he'd make them. Asked how many. Aidan said 20. Tolben raised an eyebrow. 20 is a lot. Each crossbow is a week's work. Steel, wood, mechanism. 20 crossbows is 5 months' work for a single blacksmith. Aidan said it wasn't for just one. That Tolben needed an assistant, an apprentice. Tolben frowned. He'd worked alone his whole life. Aidan said he wouldn't be able to finish it alone. Tolben snorted. He nodded. Connor became the assistant, Garth's middle son. Quiet, lean, skilled hands. He didn't say much, but worked precisely. Tolben grumbled the first week. Then he stopped. Connor learned quickly. He listened, he watched, he repeated. 10 days later, he forged his first bracket that Tolben deemed serviceable. Without a word. He simply took it and hung it on the smithy wall next to his own. That was worth more than any praise. Crossbows began to appear. The first one was rough, crooked, the bolt jammed, but it fired. The bolt flew 40 paces and penetrated a wooden shield by 2 fingers. Aidan stood and watched. 40 paces. That's not enough. We need 100. The bow is weak. We need a plate that's thinner but stiffer. A different tempering. He went back to Tolben, explained. Tolben remade it. The second crossbow shot 70 paces. The third, 90. The fourth pierced the chainmail that Tolben had borrowed from a passing merchant. At 80 paces, the bolt passed through the chainmail rings and embedded itself in the log behind them. Tolben stood and looked at the hole in the chainmail. He said quietly that this changed everything. Aidan nodded. It did change everything. A knight in chainmail on horseback was worth an entire village. He had trained since childhood. His armor protected him from arrows and swords. He was the elite, out of reach for the peasants. And now a peasant with 2 weeks of training could take him down with a single bolt. It was a revolution, a small one, a quiet one, in a smithy at the edge of the world, but a revolution nonetheless. Bran began training the archers, 20 men, young, strong, fishermen. They had never held a weapon more complex than a knife. Bran wasn't a soldier either, but Aiden explained the principles to him: stance, aiming, anticipation, breathing. Shoot on the exhale. Don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze smoothly. Bran listened. He tried. Then he taught the others. Every evening after work, on the wall and by the sea, 20 men would go out beyond the village and shoot at targets. Wooden shields with circles drawn in charcoal. At first, they hit every other shot from 20 paces. A week later, they hit at 30 paces. 2 weeks later, at 50. Aiden watched and counted. 20 shooters, 50 paces of guaranteed hits. A rate of fire of 1 bolt per minute with a swing reload. That would be enough against a dozen horsemen. Maybe. If everything goes according to plan, if they don't panic, if the ditch slows the horses down, if the wall provides cover. A lot of ifs, but better than nothing. Mara had been working just as hard as the men these past weeks. She taught the women of Calston everything she knew: soap, rehydration, willow bark, boiling, isolation, bandaging. She spent 3 hours a day with them, patiently, repeating the same thing 10 times, 20 times, until they remembered, until their hands started doing it on their own. Aiden watched. Mara became a teacher. Not just through Aiden's hands, an independent teacher. She put things into her own way, simpler, clearer, in the language of these women. Where Aiden spoke of bacteria, Mara spoke of dirt that creeps inside. Where Aiden spoke of temperature control, Mara said the water should bubble like a storm. She translated his knowledge into human language, and that was more valuable than the knowledge itself. One evening, Aiden sat by the hearth and ran through their supplies in his head. Mara came in. She sat down beside him. She was silent. Then she said she wanted to ask something. Aiden Dan nodded. Mara asked if he would stay. Aiden didn't understand. He asked what she meant. Mara said that strangers are brought in by the sea and carried away by the sea, that people come and go, that she doesn't know why he's here, but she wants to know if he'll stay. Aiden looked at her gray eyes, at her hands, which were no longer cracked and bleeding. Soap. His soap. He'd made it for those hands. The first thing he'd created in this world was for her. He said he would stay. Mara nodded. She stood up. She walked to the hearth. She stopped. Without turning around, she said she was glad. And she left. Aiden sat and watched the fire. Something in his chest felt warm, unfamiliar. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had been glad he was staying. His 3 ex-wives certainly hadn't been. The 5th month. The wall was almost finished. The palisade formed a ring around the village. The moat had been dug, the stakes driven in. The gates stood, heavy, made of oak, with an iron bolt crafted by Tolbin. In 3 months, Brynholt had transformed from an open village into a fortified settlement. Not a fortress, no, but walls a man and a half high, a moat, a single gate, 20 crossbowmen. For a fishing village at the edge of the world, this was unthinkable. Garth walked along the wall and shook his head. He told Aiden that his grandfather had spoken of times when villages erected palisades against raids from the sea. But that was 100 years ago. No one had built anything since then. There was no need. The Baron protected them. Or rather, he was supposed to protect them. Aiden said nothing. The Baron didn't protect them. The Baron took from them. Now the village would protect itself. Selena had changed over the past few weeks. Not suddenly, slowly, like water wearing away stone. She still held her back straight. She still spoke in short, clipped phrases. But she started greeting the women by name. She started asking not only about supplies, but also about the children, about their health, about their needs. Once, Dira complained that her husband had a toothache and couldn't go out to sea. Selina went to Aiden. She said that Brands wasn't working because of his tooth, that it meant one less fisherman, that it meant so many fewer fish per week. She spoke in numbers, but behind the numbers stood a man with a toothache. Aiden went to see Brands. He looked at the tooth. Rotten. Down to the nerve. It needed to be pulled. He wasn't a dentist, but he knew anatomy. He knew that a rotting tooth could kill. Infection in the blood. Sepsis. Death. He asked Tolbin to make some forceps, small ones, with thin jaws. Tolbin made them. Aiden gave Brands some strong beer, a lot. He waited for it to take effect. Then he pulled. Brands screamed. Brands and Connor held him. The tooth came out. Blood. Lots of blood. Aiden rinsed the socket with salted boiled water. He packed it with a cloth soaked in the solution. He told him not to eat anything hard for 2 days. Brands went out to sea the next day. Selina recorded it. Brands is in the ranks. Fish plus so many. Numbers. Behind which are people. Baron Halder Grimm arrived in the 6th month. Not with war, for now. Out of curiosity. A dozen horsemen, chainmail, swords, spears, a banner with a black boar on a yellow field. They appeared on the road in the morning. Finn would have been the first to see them if she had already been in Brynholt, but she wasn't there yet. The first to see them was a boy from Calston, whom Aiden had posted as a lookout on the hill. The boy ran up, gasping for breath. Horsemen, 12 of them, with coats of arms. Aiden was standing by the water trough. He heard. He looked at Garth. Garth turned pale. He said one word. Grim. Aiden nodded. He told everyone to stay calm. The men were not to touch their crossbows, not to show their weapons, to behave like an ordinary village. Frightened. Submissive. Bran growled through clenched teeth. He wanted to climb the wall. Aiden said no. He said that 12 horsemen in chainmail were not something to fight openly. Now was not the time. Bran gritted his teeth but obeyed. The gates opened. The horsemen rode in. At the front was the Baron, Halder Grimm. Aiden saw him, and his brain instantly began to process. A man of about 45, large, a fleshy face, small eyes, deep set, a thin mouth, large hands, resting habitually on the bow of the saddle, richly dressed, good chainmail, a surcoat with a coat of arms over it, a cloak lined with fur, leather boots, new, a sword at his belt, long, heavy. The hilt is worn, he uses it. The Baron's eyes moved, surveying the village, slowly, appraisingly, like a merchant inspecting his wares. Aiden saw those eyes pause on the water trough, on the children's clean faces, on the wall, on the smithy from which smoke was rising. The Baron's eyes narrowed. He dismounted, slowly, heavily. His men remained in the saddles, hands on their weapons. Garth stepped forward. He bowed, low, as befits a peasant before a baron. He said he was glad to see his lordship the Baron in Brynholt. The Baron did not look at him. He looked at the water conduit. He walked over. He touched the stone basin. He ran his finger over the wet stone. He looked at the water. Clean, clear, flowing. He asked who had built it. Garth said the villagers had. The Baron looked at him. For the first time. His eyes were cold. He asked who had come up with the idea. Garth hesitated. Aiden stepped forward. He bowed, not as low as Garth. He said it was him, that his name was Aiden, that he was a healer, that the sea had washed him ashore 6 months ago and the village had taken him in. The Baron looked at him. For a long time. The Baron walked through the village, slowly. He went into houses. He looked. He touched. His men followed behind, brazenly. One shoved a boy. Another grabbed a smoked fish from a rope and stuffed it into his bag. No one said a word. Bran stood white with rage. Mara held him by the sleeve. The Baron entered the smithy. He saw the crossbow, unfinished, on the workbench. He froze, turned to Tolbin, asked what it was. Tolbin muttered that it was a hunting crossbow, for hares. The Baron picked up the crossbow, turned it over in his hands. He was no fool when it came to weapons. He saw that this was no hunting crossbow. He saw the steel bow. He saw the trigger. He looked at Tolbin, then at Aiden. He said nothing. He put the crossbow back. He left. Lunch. Garth invited the Baron to his home. That was the custom. The suzerain had arrived. The vassal fed him. The table was set with the best they had: smoked fish, bread, salted meat, beer, honey. The Baron sat down. He ate. His men ate at a second table, greedily, noisily. The Baron ate in silence. He watched. He thought. Aiden sat across from him. He observed. He waited. The Baron spoke. He said he'd heard of a village where people don't get sick, where water flows on its own, where a blacksmith forges steel unlike anything the Baron's craftsmen have. He said he had come to see it. He had seen it. He was impressed. He asked Aiden the healer where he was from. Aiden repeated. The sea. The storm. The village took him in. The Baron smirked. He said that for a drowned man he knew too much. Aiden said nothing. The Baron continued. He said that everything in Brynholt belonged to him. The land, the houses, the people, the water, the smithy, everything. By right, by law, by the will of the king he serves. And that if the healer wants to live and work on his land, he must do so for him. He said he needed a healer in the castle, that he needed steel, that he needed a man who builds water pipes. He said he would take Aiden with him. Today. Garth turned pale. Mara, standing by the door, clenched her hands. Aiden sat calmly. His mind was weighing the options. Leaving with the Baron meant losing everything. Brynholt would be left without him. All his endeavors would die. Mara couldn't manage alone. Tolbin couldn't manage alone. Refusing the Baron meant war, here and now. 12 armed men against the peasants, crossbows in the houses. But they wouldn't have time to get them. The Baron isn't a fool. His men are nearby, with swords. He needed a third option. Aiden spoke, calmly, slowly. He said he was flattered by the Baron's offer, that he was ready to serve, but that he asks for time. 1 month. To finish the work in the village, to train the people who will carry on without him. He said that if the Baron takes him now, the village will go back to the way it was. The water pipes will break. The forge will go cold. The soap will run out. But if given a month, the village will run itself, and pay the Baron not a third of the catch, but half, with steel, soap, smoked fish that keeps for months. The Baron listened. His small eyes gleamed. Half. More than a third. And steel. And soap. Things that cost money, he thought. Aiden could see the gears turning in his head. Greed versus impatience. Greed was winning. The Baron said a month, not a day more, and that he would send someone in a month to check. Aiden nodded, bowed. The Baron stood up, brushed off the crumbs, walked toward the door, stopped, turned to Aiden, said he didn't like being lied to, said he knew it wasn't a hunter's crossbow in the smithy, said that if in a month the healer wasn't ready to move, he'd burn the village. He went out, mounted his horse, rode away. 12 horsemen behind him. Dust. Silence. Bran exhaled. He cursed long and filthy. Garth sat down on a bench. His hands were shaking. He looked at Aiden. He asked what now. Aiden said that now it was a month. 30 days. And that the Baron would return. Not for him, for everything. Garth said he knew, that he had always known, that you can't make offers to barons. They take. Aiden nodded. He said that was exactly why taking it had to be more expensive than leaving it. Garth didn't understand. Aiden explained. When the baron returns, he won't find a village waiting for him. He'll find a wall, a moat, crossbows, people ready to shoot. And then the baron will calculate how much the attack costs, how many men he'll lose, how much a dead knight is worth. And if the losses are too great, he'll leave. Or he'll negotiate. Garth was silent. Then he said quietly, "And if he doesn't leave?" Aiden looked him in the eye. "Then we'll kill him." Garth didn't blink. He nodded. So it was decided. That night, Aiden didn't sleep. He sat in Mara's house. She wasn't sleeping either. She sat by the hearth, her hands on her knees. They were silent. Then Mara said that the baron frightened her, that she had seen his eyes, that he looked at the village the way a master looks at his livestock. Aiden said she was right. Mara said that if the baron took Aiden, the village would die. Not right away, slowly, just as it had died before him. Aiden turned to her. He said he wouldn't go anywhere. Mara looked at him. There was something in her eyes that Aiden couldn't read, or maybe he could, but was afraid to. She said okay. She stood up. She went to bed. She stopped. She spoke softly. She said that if the baron returned and there was a fight, she would stand beside him. Not hide. Stand. Aiden wanted to say that it was foolish, that they needed her alive, that if he died, she had to continue his work. But he didn't say it, because he understood. This wasn't about war, it was about choice. Mara had chosen, and he had no right to overturn someone else's choice. 30 days. Aiden broke them down in his head like a project. Every day was scheduled, every task tied to a deadline. The first 10 days. Finish arming. All 20 crossbows ready. Bolts, at least 100. A reserve. The second 10 days. Engineering traps. Pitfalls on the approaches to the village. Stakes under the snow. Catapults on the road. The third 10 days. Training. Shooting. Reloading. Discipline. Deployment to positions. Every archer knows his sector. Everyone knows where to run if the wall falls. Everyone knows what to do if he falls. War. He was preparing fishermen for war. Men who had spent their whole lives hauling nets. He slept 4 hours a day. He was losing weight. His cheeks sunk in. Mara forced him to eat. He ate and felt no taste. Tolbin worked like a man possessed, Connor by his side. The forge never fell silent. Day and night. The clang of the hammer, the hissing of water, the rumble of bellows. Crossbows came out one after another, each better than the last. Tolbin learned from every mistake. His hands did what his mind understood. A perfect combination of knowledge and skill, something Aiden lacked. Bolts, iron tips, faceted, tetrahedral, for piercing chainmail. Aiden explained the shape. Tolbin forged them. Connor sharpened them. By the 10th day, 20 crossbows stood in a row against the smithy wall. 120 bolts in bundles. Tolbin stood and looked at them. His face was gray with exhaustion. His hands were burned. But he looked at that row, and Aiden saw in his eyes something he had never seen before. Pride. Not the pride of a craftsman who had made a fine piece of work, the pride of a man who had made something capable of defending his home. Traps. Aiden designed them. The men dug. The road to Brynholt ran through a narrow valley between the hills, the only route for cavalry. Aiden walked it 3 times, studied every bend, every narrowing, every slope. Here. At the bend where the road narrows to 3 horses abreast. Pitfalls. 6 of them. 3 on each side of the road. Chest deep for a horse. Stakes at the bottom, covered with branches and snow. Further on, traps. Sharpened stakes driven into the ground at an angle, at chest height for a horse. A horse won't step over them. it'll stumble. Even further on, right before the wall, a 30-step stretch, cleared of snow, level, easy to shoot across. 20 crossbowmen on the wall. Their firing sectors overlap, a triangular formation. Every point in front of the wall is covered by at least 2 crossbowmen. 0 dead zone. Aidan stood on the wall and looked at this strip. 30 paces. A rider would cover them in 10 seconds. In 10 seconds, 20 archers will have time to fire a single volley. 20 bolts. If half hit, that's 10 wounded or dead horses and men. If the Baron brings 30 horsemen, 10 after the first volley, 20 left. Second volley in a minute, 10 more, 10 left. Third volley, that's it. The mathematics of war, cold, precise, inhuman. Aidan knew these numbers, and he knew reality would be different. The archers would miss. They'd panic. Bolts would jam. The gate would seize up. Someone would run. Someone would freeze. Reality is always worse than math. That's why he calculated with a margin. And that's why every evening 20 men fired at targets until dark. On the 12th day of the 30, Finn appeared. She didn't appear. She was caught. At night. A sentry on the wall heard a rustle. He shouted. They grabbed her. Small, skinny, dirty, dark eyes, short-cropped hair. A boy. No, a girl. About 18, maybe 19, in torn clothes, with a knife in her sleeve. They brought her to Hart. Hart looked at her, asked who and why. The girl was silent, clenched her jaw, looked from under her brows, like a cornered animal. Hart sighed. He called for Aidan. Aidan came. He looked at her. His mind was calculating. Exhaustion, dehydration, old bruises on her wrists, rope marks, a runaway. From where? He asked. She remained silent. He asked differently, asked if she was hungry. Her eyes flinched. She said yes. Mara brought some soup. The girl ate greedily, burning herself, never letting go of the knife in her left hand. She ate with her right. Her left held the knife. Done. Aidan sat across from her and waited. When she finished eating, she spoke. She said her name was Finn, that she was from Velmar, that she was a thief, that she'd been caught, that they were supposed to hang her, that she'd run away. She'd been running for 3 weeks, through the woods, along the shore, eating whatever she could find. She came here because she saw smoke and a wall and decided it was safer inside the wall than outside. Garth said a thief had no place in the village. Aidan looked at Finn, at her eyes, quick, piercing. In a minute she surveyed the room, the doors, the windows, the weapons on the wall, the distance to the exit. She calculated just like he did, not formulas. Space, people, danger, exits. A different kind of mind, but a mind nonetheless. Aidan told Garth he needed someone who could see what others couldn't. Garth raised an eyebrow. Aidan said the Baron would return in 18 days, that they needed intelligence. They needed to know when he'd leave, how many people, which route. Finn looked up. She looked at Aidan, suspiciously. He was offering her a job, not a favor, not pity, a job. She asked what she'd get in return. Aidan said a roof, food, a place, a name. Finn snorted. She said she already had a name. Aidan said he meant a different name, not a thief, not a fugitive. Brynholt's scout. Finn was silent. Then she nodded, briefly, like a dog that had decided not to bite. For now. Finn left the next morning, light, fast, silent. Aidan didn't know if she'd come back, but he felt she would. Not because he trusted people, he didn't trust people. Because Finn was hungry. Not for food, for a place. She'd been nobody's all her life, and he'd offered her a chance to belong to someone. 5 days later, Finn returned, wet, dirty, but alive, and with information. Baron Grimm is in the castle, gathering men, not 12, 30, Mercenaries from the neighboring province. 10 of the Baron's horsemen, 20 on foot, with ladders. He knows about the wall. He'll set out in 12 days, maybe sooner. The road through the valley. There is no other way. Aidan listened, nodded. 30. More than he had expected. Ladders mean they'll storm the wall. Foot soldiers mean the pits are less effective. Need to change the plan. He went to the wall, stood and looked, thought. 20 crossbowmen against 30, 10 of whom are mounted. The wall, the moat, the pits, the catapults. What else? Fire, tar, boiling water. Yes, cauldrons on the wall, boiling water. Tar that can be set alight. A ladder doused in tar is hard to hold on to. He called Bran, explained. Cauldrons on the wall. Prepare the fire, gather the tar. Bran listened grimly. Then he asked, "Are we really going to pour boiling water on people?" Aidan looked at him, said that these people would come to kill their families, to take their wives, to burn their homes. Bran clenched his jaw, nodded, went to prepare. Finn stayed behind. She slept in the shed by the forge, alone, with a knife. She didn't speak to anyone. She ate by herself. Mara tried to strike up a conversation with her. Finn looked at her as if she were a wall, silently. Selena didn't notice her at all. Finn didn't notice Selena. 2 worlds. A homeless aristocrat and a homeless thief. Both nobodies. Both here because they have nowhere else to go. But between them stands a wall higher than the one surrounding Brynholt. Aidan watched. He didn't interfere. It was too soon. People don't come together on command. They come together when they stand together facing something terrifying. Soon it would be terrifying, and then the walls between them would fall. Or they wouldn't. But he hoped. The days passed. Preparations for battle took on a different character. Not construction. Waiting. 20 men paced along the wall. They watched the road. They were nervous. Wives wept at night. Children sensed the anxiety and acted up. The old men grumbled that they shouldn't have angered the Baron. Hart walked among the people, quiet, calm. His calmness held the village together, like a keel holds a boat. Aidan saw this and was grateful. He himself didn't know how to comfort, didn't know how to be warm. He knew how to calculate and plan. Garth knew how to stand and be a rock. Together they covered all bases. The Baron arrived on the 26th day, sooner than Finn had predicted. She ran in at night, out of breath, said the column had left the castle at dawn. They'd be here by morning. Aidan stood up, woke Garth. Garth woke Bran. Bran roused the archers, quietly. No shouting, no panic, just as they'd practiced. Everyone knew their place. 20 men to the wall, crossbows loaded, bolts in quivers, cauldrons on the fire, water heating, tar in buckets, women and children in the center of the village, in the sturdiest house, stone walls. Mara with them. Mara was supposed to be with them. She refused, quietly, firmly, said she'd be on the wall, would tend to the wounded. Aidan didn't argue. Selena took Theo and led him to the shelter. Before leaving, she approached Aidan, looked at him. She said one word. Count. Aidan nodded. He counted. He counted the whole time. Dawn. Gray. Cold. Fog from the sea. Visibility 200 paces. Then 100. Then 50. Bad for archers. Good for the attackers. Aidan stood on the wall by the gate. He looked into the fog. Bran was beside him, a crossbow in his hands, fingers white on the stock. Bran was afraid. Everyone was afraid. Aidan was afraid too. But his fear was different, cold, calculating. He feared a mistake in his calculations, feared the pits wouldn't work, that the catapults had shifted, that the archers would miss, that the wall wouldn't hold. Human fear lay somewhere deeper, beneath the calculations, beneath the formulas. He didn't touch it. No time. A sound. Hooves, distant, dull. The frozen earth hummed. They were coming. Iden raised his hand. Silence on the wall. 20 men fell silent, stopped breathing. The first figures emerged from the fog. Horsemen. 5. In front, a banner with a black boar. Behind them, the foot soldiers. In 2 rows, shields, spears, ladders. 4 ladders. Aiden counted. 10 horsemen, 22 on foot, 32. More than Finn had said. The Baron had found more men. They were marching down the road, confidently. They hadn't expected resistance. The wall surprised them. The moat surprised them. But it didn't stop them. The commander of the horsemen, not the Baron. The Baron was riding in the middle. The commander was in front. He raised his hand. The column stopped. He was looking at the wall, at the moat. Aiden saw his face. Young, about 30 years old. A scar on his cheek. A professional. A mercenary. He was assessing, calculating, just like Aiden, only from the other side. The commander shouted, ordered the gates to be opened. In the name of Baron Grimm. Silence. He shouted again. Silence. Aiden didn't answer. Let him shout. Let him waste time. Let him stand before the wall and wonder what's inside. Every minute of waiting worked in Brynholt's favor. Nerves, cold, uncertainty. The commander turned to the Baron. The Baron rode forward, on horseback, heavy, in full armor. His horse snorted, steam from its nostrils. The Baron shouted himself, said he was giving the village one last chance. Open the gates, hand over the healer, lay down your weapons, then no one will die. Aiden stood on the wall, silent. The Baron waited. The silence was oppressive. Then the Baron waved his hand. It began. The foot soldiers moved forward, shields raised, ladders on their shoulders. They marched in tight formation, toward the wall, across the strip. The first row took 30 steps. Nothing. 40. Nothing. 50. A scream. The ground gave way. 2 men fell into a pit. Pegs. The scream cut off. The formation broke. People scattered to the sides. Another pit. Another scream. Panic. The commander was yelling. He was rallying the formation. People huddled together. They went around the pits. Slower. Careful. But they kept going. They reached the palisades. The horses stopped. The palisades were at the horses' chest level. The cavalry was useless. The commander realized this quickly. He dismounted the riders. Now everyone was on foot. They hacked at the palisades with their swords. Slowly. The wood was hard. Tolbin's steel. They chopped and couldn't cut through. They were wasting time. They stood exposed. 30 paces from the wall. Aiden lowered his hand. Bran shouted. 20 crossbows fired at once. A sound like the crack of breaking wood. The bolts flew. 30 paces. It was impossible to miss. Almost. 14 hits out of 20. 6 misses. Panic. Nerves. Hands were shaking. But 14 hit. The bolts pierced the chainmail like cloth. 7 men fell. 4 killed. 3 wounded. The rest covered themselves with shields, crouched down, screamed. The commander screamed louder. Forward, to the wall, ladders. Reloading the crossbow with a bolt takes 1 minute. A minute during which the archers are defenseless. The foot soldiers ran. Over the palisades, across the moat. The ladders fell against the wall. 2, 3, 4. People began climbing. Mara stood behind the wall below, bandages in her hands, a pale face. But she stood. Aiden shouted, "Cauldrons! Women on the wall!" 3. The chosen ones, strong ones. They lifted the cauldrons. Boiling water gushed onto the ladders. A scream. Terrifying. Inhuman. People fell from the ladders, scalded. One ladder caught fire. Tar. The flames shot upward. The ladder was abandoned. A second volley. The crossbows were reloaded. Bran shouted, 18 bolts. 2 archers were too late. Their hands were shaking. The bolt jammed. But 18 struck. 10 paces away. Point-blank range. 3 misses. 15 hits. 6 more men on the ground. The formation collapsed. People ran. Not forward, backward. The commander tried to stop them. It was useless. They ran. Over pits, over barricades, stumbling over bodies. The Baron stood in the rear, on horseback, watching. His face. Aidan saw it from the wall. Not fear, not rage, confusion. Peasants, fishermen. They had just killed 13 of his men. In 3 minutes. From behind a wooden wall, with something that pierces chainmail. Baron Grimm's world had just been turned upside down. He didn't realize it yet, but he felt it. The Baron turned his horse around. He retreated. His men had gathered on the road, out of reach. 17 out of 32. 15 remained, on the ground, in pits by the wall. Moans, screams, silence. Aidan stood on the wall and watched. His hands weren't shaking. They should have been, but they weren't. 13 men lay before the wall, some dead, some dying. He had killed them, not with his own hands, with his mind, with his calculations, with his crossbows, with his pits. Technically, Bran and his men had fired the arrows. In reality, every bolt was his, every pit was his, every liter of boiling water was his. He stood and waited for something. Horror, remorse, nausea. Nothing. It was empty. Then relief came. Quiet, shameful. Relief that it was them and not his men. He accepted it, like a formula, like a fact. The Baron hadn't left. He stood on the road, waiting. His commander rode up to the wall, alone, unarmed. He shouted that the Baron was offering to negotiate. Aidan came down. He walked out through the gate, alone. Bran hissed at him not to go. Aidan went. He stood before the mercenary commander. The commander looked at him, asked who he was. Aidan said he was a healer. The commander smirked, said that healers don't build walls or make weapons that pierce chainmail. Aidan shrugged, said that a good healer heals before the wound is inflicted. The commander didn't smile. He said the Baron wanted to speak. Aidan said, "Let him speak." The Baron rode up, heavy, angry. His eyes were small, red. He'd lost 15 men in 3 minutes. It had cost him more than the entire village. He looked at Aidan, and Aidan could see what the Baron was thinking, calculating how much another attack would cost, how many men he would lose, whether he could win. And he realized he couldn't. Not with 17. Not against this wall and these weapons. The Baron said he would return. With an army. With 100. With 200. That he would raze the village to the ground. Aidan listened calmly. Then he said the Baron might return. With 100. With 200. But that each time the wall would be higher. The weapons would be better. There would be more men. And that each time the losses would be greater. And that sooner or later, the Baron would have to explain to Chancellor Storn why he was losing men trying to take a fishing village. The Baron flushed. He opened his mouth, closed it. He turned his horse around, rode off. His men followed him. Finn appeared from behind the wall, like a shadow. She said quietly that one of the Baron's horsemen had broken away from the column and galloped north, toward the Chancellor's castle. Aidan nodded. So time is running out. The Chancellor will hear. And the Chancellor is not the Baron. The Chancellor is on another level. That evening, Brynholt held a funeral. Not for his own men. The Baron's men. Those who'd been left at the wall. Aidan insisted. Garth didn't understand why. Enemies. They'd come to kill. Aidan said they were people, mercenaries, poor men. They'd sold their swords for silver. not for a cause. They deserved a grave. The men dug, silently, grimly, 13 graves by the wall. No names, no crosses, just earth. Aidan stood over the graves. Garth approached, stood beside him, said quietly that from this day forward, they were the ones who killed barons, that it was a heavy profession. Aidan said there was no other now. Garth nodded. They stood, in silence. The wind from the sea carried the scent of salt and snow. Behind the wall, the fires of Brynholt burned. After the battle, Brynholt stood still for 3 days. People walked quietly. They spoke in whispers. Children didn't play in the streets. Women didn't sing while they worked. Brynholt had killed 13 men and didn't know how to live with it. Bran didn't sleep. He sat on the wall at night, stared into the darkness. His crossbow had killed 4. He'd seen them fall, seen their faces, young, like his own. Mercenaries, poor men with swords, who might have been fishermen in another life. Bran didn't talk about it, but Aidan saw how Bran's hands shook when he picked up a spoon, saw how he flinched at loud noises, knew what it was. Post-traumatic stress. In his old world, there were psychologists for that. Here, there were only people nearby. Aidan approached Bran on the 3rd night, sat down next to him on the wall. He was silent, for a long time. Then he said that Bran had saved 40 children, that if the wall had fallen, if the archers hadn't fired, those children would be dead, or worse. That those 13 had come to kill, that Bran hadn't chosen between good and bad, between bad and terrible. And he'd chosen correctly. Bran was silent. Then he said quietly that he knew, but that his hands were still shaking. Aidan said that was normal, that they were shaking because he was human, that if they weren't shaking, he'd have to be afraid. Bran looked at him. For the first time in 3 days, his face came alive. He asked if Aidan's hands were shaking. Aidan paused. He said no. And that was exactly why he feared himself more than the Baron. Life was returning, slowly. The fishermen went out to sea. The women returned to their work. Soap was being boiled, water flowed, the forge clanged. But something had changed. The people of Brynholt looked at one another differently. They stood together on the wall. Together they poured boiling water. Together they listened to the screams. Together they buried the dead. This bound them tighter than blood ties, tighter than shared soil. They were a garrison, not a village, a garrison. And they felt it, even if they didn't know the word. A week after the battle, Baron Grimm returned. Not with an army, alone, on horseback, without armor, without weapons, a white rag on his spear. Negotiations. They let him in. Hart went out to meet him. Aidan followed. The Baron dismounted. He looked terrible. His face was gray, his eyes sunken. A week without sleep. He had lost 15 men. His treasury was empty. Mercenaries cost money. Dead mercenaries cost even more. The rest had scattered. Who would go to work for a baron who couldn't take a fishing village? His reputation, his power. Everything was crumbling. And the Chancellor had sent a messenger. He asked why his vassal was wasting people on some backwater on the coast instead of collecting taxes. The Baron was caught between a rock and a hard place. Aidan saw it all in his eyes and waited. The Baron spoke. It was hard, through gritted teeth. He said he was ready to make a deal, that the village would pay the usual 1/3 of the catch, no more, that the healer would stay in the village, that the Baron wouldn't touch Brynholt. In return, he wanted crossbows, 10 of them, and soap, regular supplies, and the healer when needed. Aidan listened. He thought, crossbows. If he gives the Baron crossbows, he'll become stronger, more dangerous. But if he doesn't give them, the Baron will return, with the chancellor's men, with a real army. And then the wall won't help. We need time. We need to buy months, a year, until Brynholt grows strong enough to become impregnable. Aidan said 5 crossbows, not 10, without bolts, ordinary ones, weaker than Brynholt's. Soap, 3 dozen bars a month. A doctor, on call, no more than once every 2 months. And one more thing, Brynholt gets the right to trade, freely, without the Baron's tax. The Baron narrowed his eyes. The right to trade is money. It means the village will get richer, without his cut. He didn't want that. But he looked at the wall, at the archers on it, at the crossbows in their hands, and nodded. Deal. Garth and the Baron shook hands, as was the custom, in front of witnesses. The Baron left, this time without promising to return. When the dust settled, Garth turned to Aidan. He asked why he'd given him the crossbows, even if they were weak, but still. Aidan said that a Baron with crossbows is a Baron who feels strong. A Baron who feels strong doesn't attack out of fear. He attacks out of greed. And greed can be fed. With soap, with fish, with steel. As long as greed is sated, the Baron is calm. Garth shook his head. He said that Aidan thinks like a merchant, not like a warrior. Aidan replied that merchants live longer. Trade. That was the next step. Brynholt produced things everyone wanted. Soap, steel, smoked fish. But until now, everything had stayed within the region. Now, with the right to trade, Aidan could bring goods out into the wider world. Soap. The first commodity. Simple, lightweight, inexpensive. A bar of soap in Brynholt cost a handful of ash and a piece of fat. At the market in the nearest town, it was worth a day's work for a craftsman. The profit margin was monstrous. Aidan did the math. If Mara and her 3 apprentices made 20 bars a week, 10 for the village, 10 for sale, 10 bars a week at the market would be income that would allow them to buy grain, seeds, tools, cloth, everything Brynholt couldn't make himself. He explained this to Selena. Selena listened. She took notes. She calculated. Her eyes burned. She saw the numbers. And behind the numbers, she saw the future. A village that trades isn't a village. It's a settlement. A settlement that trades a lot is a small town. And a small town is a whole different story. A different status, different rights, different protection. Bran took the first batch of soap to market, with a cart, with 2 assistants. The town of Stone Harbor, a day's journey south, a small port town, market on Thursdays. Bran left in the morning. He returned 3 days later. The cart was empty. A sack of silver. 20 bars of soap sold in 2 hours. People grabbed them, sniffed them, squeezed them, bought them. The soap was a novelty, a miracle, a thing that made hands clean and made the smell disappear. Bran said merchants had approached him, asked how much he could supply. He said one merchant had offered a standing order, 100 bars a month. Aidan nodded. 100 bars. That's 5 batches a week. We need more people, more lye, more fat. We need a soap factory, not a pot by the hearth, a building, with cauldrons, with molds, with a drying room, a factory. Brynholt's first factory. He went to Mara, told her she needed assistance, not 3, 10. That we needed a separate building, that she wouldn't just be making soap but running the soap factory. Mara looked at him. She said quietly that she was a herbalist, not a soap factory manager. Aidan said that a month ago she had been a herbalist. Now she was the best healer on the coast. And tomorrow she would be the manager of a factory that fed all of Brynholt. Mara was silent. Then she smiled, small, quiet. The first smile Aidan had ever seen on her face. She said, "All right." She turned and went to recruit assistants. Over the next 2 months, Brynholt changed rapidly. The soap factory was up and running, a separate house, 5 cauldrons, 10 women. Mara was in charge, calmly, confidently, as if she'd been doing it her whole life. The products went to the market in Stone Harbor every week. Silver came back. With the silver, they bought grain, seeds, tools, cloth for clothes, salt. Things that had once been luxuries became commonplace. The children wore new shirts, not patched together from old ones, new ones, made from purchased fabric. The women cried when they received them, not out of sadness, because for the first time in their lives, they were wearing clothes without holes. Aiden watched this and thought that the value of a bar of soap could not be measured in silver. Its value was measured in the tears on the faces of the women who were wearing a shirt without holes for the first time. Spring came at the end of the 7th month. The snow was melting. Streams were running down from the hills. The ground was thawing. Time to sow. Garth planted peas in his field, just as he had promised. Aiden stood beside him and explained planting depth, distance between rows, how to water, when to expect sprouts. Hart listened. He did as he was told. His hands knew the earth. 60 years of knowing. They didn't need to be told how to hold a hoe. They only needed to be told what to plant and where. The rest they knew themselves. 2 weeks later, the peas sprouted, green, thick, even rows. Hart stood at the edge of the field and watched. Then he turned toward the village. He shouted, "It works." The men dropped what they were doing and came over. They stood there. They looked at the peas. Then they looked at their own fields, sown with grain the old way. And they thought, next year, everyone would plant the new way. Aiden stood apart. He didn't interfere. He didn't explain. The peas spoke for themselves, better than any words. By the end of the 8th month, Brynholt's population had grown to 200. People were coming. From Calston, from villages further down the coast, from deep within the country. Rumors spread. A village where people don't get sick, where water flows on its own, where they pay in silver for work, where a wall protects. Families came, lonesomes, old folks, young people. Aiden welcomed everyone. He found work for everyone. Carpenters built new houses. It became cramped inside the wall. They expanded the wall, a new perimeter. Bigger, wider. The work never ended. Selena kept track. Every new person, every new mouth to feed, every pair of working hands, balancing income and expenses. She became indispensable. Without her, Aiden wouldn't know how much grain was left, how much soap had been produced, how much silver was in the treasury. The treasury. Brynholt had a treasury, a clay pot with silver coins. Selena counted them every evening. She wrote it down. Aiden once caught her doing this and said she was keeping the first budget in the history of Arcadia. Selena raised an eyebrow. She asked what a budget was. Aiden explained. Selena snorted. She said that calling a pot of coins a budget was like calling a chicken coop a palace. Aiden smiled. He said that palaces start with chicken coops. Selena looked at him. For a long time. Then she turned away to her birch bark sheets. But Aiden saw it. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. The first one from Selena that wasn't directed at Theo. Fate brought a ship to Brynholt. Not a warship, a merchant vessel. A small junk with a gaff sail, of an unprecedented shape, flat bottom, high stern, a hull divided into compartments. It appeared off the shore in the morning. A sentry on the wall shouted. People poured onto the shore. They stood. They watched. No one here had ever seen a ship like this. A rowboat was lowered from the junk. 2 people. A man of about 50. A woman of about 25. Both with black hair. Both with faces never before seen in Arcadia. Narrow eyes, high cheekbones, skin the color of tea with milk. Strange clothing. Long robes with wide sashes. The man walked ahead. He limped. His left leg was bandaged. The woman walked behind him, calm, upright, a rosary on her belt, wooden, with bone beads. She held it as a warrior holds a sword, habitually, as if it were a part of herself. Garth stepped forward to meet them, hand on his belt, not hostile, alert. The man bowed, deeply, formally. He spoke. His accent was heavy, but he knew the language of Arcadia. He said his name was Ejon Rhee, that he was a cartographer and navigator from the kingdom of Joseon, far to the east, beyond 2 oceans. That his ship had been caught in a storm off the coast of Velmar. The crew had perished. Only he and his daughter remained. They had spent 2 months repairing the ship in the port of Velmar. They were heading south. They were looking for a place to stay. They'd heard of a village on the coast that took in strangers. Garth looked at Aiden. Aiden was standing behind him. He was looking at Ejon Rhee, at his daughter, at the junk. His mind was buzzing. Joseon, Korea, the 15th century. No, not Korea. An analog. This world had its own East, its own version. A junk with partitioned compartments. He knew this design. Watertight bulkheads. If one compartment is breached, the ship doesn't sink. Europe would learn this in 400 years. But here, on the shore of his village, there stood a ship with this technology, and the man who built it, and his daughter, with abacus beads. Aiden stepped forward. He bowed to Ejon just as deeply. Ejon was surprised. Here, they didn't bow like that to strangers with different faces. Aiden spoke, slowly, clearly. He asked about the compartments in the hull. Ejon froze. His eyes changed, instantly. From wary, they became sharp. Sharp. He asked how Aiden knew about the compartments. Aiden said he knew a lot, and that he'd like to learn more. Ejon was silent. Then he smiled slowly. He said that for the first time in 2 years on this continent, someone had asked him an intelligent question. His daughter stood nearby. She looked at Aiden. Dark eyes, calm, appraising. She said nothing, but her hand on the abacus relaxed slightly. That was all he needed to know. Ejon Lee and his daughter So-yoon stayed. Aiden gave them a house, the best one available, new, with a chimney, with glass windows. Yes, glass. Aiden had taught them how to make the simplest kind of glass 2 months ago. Sand, ash, heat, cloudy, greenish, but transparent. Light passed through it. It was more than a bull's bladder. Ejon entered the house and saw the glass in the windows. He stopped. He touched it, turned to Aiden. Said that in Joseon they use oiled paper, that they know about glass but make little of it, that this glass is rough but works. Aiden nodded. Said that everything here is rough, but it works. Ejon smiled. They understood each other. 2 people from different worlds who spoke the same language. The language of things that work. The first conversation between Aiden and Ejon lasted 6 hours. They sat in Garth's house, drank beer, talked. Ejon talked about Joseon, about ships, about navigating by the stars, about the compass, about gunpowder. Joseon knew gunpowder, used it in fireworks and in primitive cannons. Aiden listened eagerly. Gunpowder. He knew the formula. Saltpeter, sulfur, coal. The proportions. But he decided not to make it yet. Now he knew that gunpowder already existed in this world, on the other side of the world. That changed everything. Ejon spoke of Joseon medicine, smallpox vaccination. Aiden nearly jumped out of his skin. Smallpox. In Arcadia, smallpox was a killer. It came once a generation. It took thousands. Joseon knew the vaccine. Variolation. You take pus from a mild smallpox boil. You dry it, grind it into a powder, blow it into the nose of a healthy person. A mild illness. 2 days of fever, then lifelong protection. Aidan knew the principle, but he didn't know the details. How to choose the right pustule, how to dry it, what dose. Ejong knew. His wife had died of smallpox in Joseon. After that, he studied variolation. He inoculated So-yoon. He inoculated himself. They survived. Aidan listened and realized that sitting before him was a man worth as much as all of Brynholt. So-yoon sat next to her father. She was silent. She was counting on her fingers. Click, click, click. Beads flew beneath her fingers, faster than Aidan could keep track of. He asked what she was counting. So-yoon looked up. She said she was counting the number of houses in the village, the area of the walls, the amount of wood used, the number of people per unit of area, population density, the optimal distance between houses to prevent fires. Aidan stared at her. She was doing urban planning calculations, in her head, just because she was curious. He asked who had taught her. So-yoon said her father, and her mother. Her mother was a mathematician, the best in their town. Aidan looked at Ejong. Ejong shrugged. He said that in Joseon, women do calculations. Not all of them, but some. And that So-yoon was better at it than he was. Aidan turned to So-yoon. He said he needed her. So-yoon raised an eyebrow slightly. She asked what for. Aidan said that Brynholt was growing, that soon it would no longer be a village but a city, and that the city needed a plan. Streets, houses, water supply, sewers, workshops, a market, a port. All of this needed to be calculated, arranged, planned. So-yoon was silent. Then she said that in Joseon she had been the daughter of a cartographer, an interesting curiosity, a smart girl. Here in Arcadia, she was a stranger, with a foreign face, with a foreign language. No one saw her mind. They saw only her eyes, narrow, unfathomable, frightening. Aidan said he could see. So-yoon looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, with a single movement, precise, like the click of a bead on an abacus. Selina greeted So-yoon coldly. Two women with numbers in the same village, territory. But Aidan divided their tasks. Selina keeps track of the past and the present, what was, what is, income, expenses. So-yoon plans the future, what will be, where to build, how much is needed. Different roles, one goal. Selina accepted this, not right away, after a week of silent standoff. When So-yoon showed her the calculation for the optimal placement of new houses, and Selina saw that the numbers were perfect, that each house is positioned so the wind won't carry smoke from the smithy to the residential quarters, that the distance between the houses is just right so a fire won't spread, that the water supply branches out based on logic, not convenience. Selina looked at So-yoon. She said the calculations were good. So-yoon nodded. She said that Selina's calculations were good too. A peace was made between them without words, only numbers. The 10th month, Brynholt received his first drawing. So-yoon had drawn it on a large piece of birch bark. A city plan. Not a village, a city. Streets, neighborhoods, a market, a port, workshops, a hospital, a school. Aidan stood over the drawing and his breath caught in his throat. For the first time, he saw his future drawn by someone else's hand. So-yoon stood nearby, calm, quiet, waiting for his assessment. Aidan said that he had seen many drawings in his life. This one was one of the best. So-yoon didn't smile, but the beads on her rosary quietly clicked, as if she had recorded the compliment. Baron Grimm was dead. Not in battle, not from illness. Stupid. Drunk, he fell from his horse, broke his neck. Finn brought the news at a run. She burst into Garth's house at dawn, eyes burning. She said 2 words, "Grimm is dead." Silence. Then Garth exhaled, then Bran cursed. Then everyone spoke at once. Aidan was silent. He was thinking. The Baron's death changed everything. Grimm's lands passed to someone, directly to Chancellor Storn, to another vassal, to the crown if there is no heir. And there was no heir. Grimm left no children, his lands, 4 villages, and Brynholt. Everything would pass to the Chancellor, Chancellor Beric Storn, regent to the ailing king, the man who had been plotting a coup, the man who controlled half of Northwald through his vassals. Now Brynholt was on his map, directly, without a buffer in the form of a dead drunkard on a horse. It was both worse and better at the same time. Worse because the Chancellor is smarter than the Baron, more dangerous. He has an army. He has power. Better because the Chancellor is too busy. He has bigger problems. The king is sick. The heir is weak. Solgrand is sharpening its teeth on the southern border. The Chancellor is playing the big game of politics. A fishing village at the edge of the world isn't his priority. Not yet. Aidan told Garth that they've got a window of opportunity, maybe maybe a year. While the Chancellor is busy with other things, we need to make the most of every day. Construction has picked up speed. Brynholt grew like a living organism. New houses, new workshops, the soap factory expanded, a second smokehouse, a sawmill by the stream with a water wheel. It was Aidan's idea, brought to life by Tolbin. The water wheel drove the saw. A school. Aidan had thought about it from day one. Now he could. A small house. 1 room. Benches. A blackboard made of smoothly planed birch. Chalk made from burnt limestone. The first teacher. Lyra. No. Lyra wasn't there yet. Selina became the first teacher. Aidan went to her. He said there were 43 children in Brynholt. Not a single one could read. Not a single one could count past 10. That this was a crime. Not theirs. The world's. And that Selina could change that. Selina looked at him. She said she was an accountant, not a teacher. Aidan said that an accountant is someone who knows letters and numbers. A teacher is an accountant who shares. Selina snorted. But the next day she walked into the school. 43 children on the benches. Dirty, noisy, disobedient. Selina stood before them, the Count's daughter. Before the fisherman's children. A year ago she would have rather died. Now she picked up a piece of chalk. She drew a letter on the board. The first one. She said its name. She told them to repeat it. 43 voices repeated it. Crookedly, loudly, cheerfully. Selina stood and listened. And Aidan, standing by the door, saw something inside her break. The last wall. The last barrier between the Countess de Vere and the person named Selina. It fell. Quietly. Like snow from a branch. Theo was the best student. A 10-year-old boy with eyes that had seen his family murdered. He read faster than the others. He calculated faster. He solved problems that Aidan gave to the oldest students. Once, Aidan gave him a problem about distributing water among 3 houses with a single source. Theo thought for an hour. He drew a diagram, with branches, with flow calculations. He brought it to Aidan. The solution was correct. Not just correct, elegant. Aidan looked at the boy and saw an engineer, a real one, a future one. In 10 years, this boy would be building bridges and aqueducts, if he survived, if the world allowed it. Aidan placed a hand on his shoulder. He said the solution was correct. That Theo had understood faster than many adults Aidan had known before. Theo looked up. Something alive flashed in his eyes. For the first time since Selina had brought him here, hope. Childlike, fragile, but real. King Oswin IV had died. A messenger brought the news. Brynholt learned of it 3 days later. Aidan stood by the wall and listened to the messenger, an old soldier with a gray beard. The king had died in his bed, quietly, in his sleep. The heir, the prince, a 16-year-old boy. Chancellor Storn declared himself regent until the prince came of age. It was a coup, a soft one, bloodless, but a coup nonetheless. The chancellor now controlled the throne, the army, the treasury, everything. The prince was a puppet. Everyone understood that. Aidan understood it better than anyone. He had read Machiavelli. He knew how usurpation worked. The chancellor would not call himself king. Why would he? There is a king, alive, on the throne, and the chancellor simply helps, simply rules, simply decides, while the king is young. Then, when the king grows up, if he grows up, the chancellor will find a way to stay, or find a way to ensure the king never grows up. Northwold stood on the brink. The army was weak. The treasury was empty. Solgran to the south, a usurper chancellor within. The villages were starving. The roads were unsafe. The country was dying. And Brynholt, a small town by the sea. It was the only place where anything grew, the only place where children learned to read, where the water was clean, where people weren't starving, where the wall stood, and the crossbows waited. 2 weeks after the king's death, a woman arrived in Brynholt, alone, on horseback, in full chainmail. Her helmet was off, black hair, short, a scar across her right eyebrow, straight back, a tired face. Beautiful, not in a soft sense, beautiful as a fine blade is beautiful. She dismounted at the gate. She looked at the wall, at the moat, at the sentry with the crossbow. She raised her hands, empty. She said she had come to talk, not to fight. Her name was Hazel North, captain of the Northwold Royal Guard, daughter of the late Marshal, the only female officer at court. She had not come on the chancellor's orders, of her own free will. Finn led her to Aidan. Finn didn't trust her. She walked beside them, hand on her knife. Her eyes never left the guest's hands. Hazel noticed. She looked at Finn. She gave a slight nod, the way a soldier nods to another soldier. Finn didn't respond, but she put the knife away. Hazel and Aidan talked for 2 hours. She told her, Chancellor Storn controls the capital. The army obeys him, most of it. The guard is divided. Half is with the chancellor, half is still loyal to the crown. Hazel is from the other half. The prince is weak, intimidated. He does what the chancellor says. The younger princess, Lyra, has disappeared. She fled the palace at night. No one knows where. Hazel is looking for her, and she's looking for allies. She's heard of Brynholt, of the healer, of the wall, of the crossbows that pierce chainmail. She came to see for herself. Aidan listened. Then he asked her questions. About the size of the chancellor's army, about supply logistics, about the condition of the roads, about the fortresses on the border with Sol Grand. Hazel answered, precisely, briefly, in a military manner. An hour and a half later, Aidan knew the Northwold military logistical system better than any general in the capital. Hazel looked at him. She was silent. Then she said quietly that her father, Marshal North, had tried to reform the army for 30 years. He hadn't been able to. There wasn't enough understanding. This man had figured out in an hour and a half everything her father hadn't been able to articulate in his entire life. Aidan looked at her. He said that the country wasn't hopeless, that it simply hadn't been built yet. Hazel didn't answer. She stood up. She walked out. She stood on the wall and looked out at the sea for a long time. Aidan didn't approach her. He knew she needed time to decide, to understand, to accept that everything she'd done for 30 years, serving, fighting, losing friends, had all taken place in a country ruled by people who didn't know how to run it. And now, here, in a fishing village with a soap factory and running water, stood a man who did know. Hazel stayed for 3 days. She inspected the fortifications. She conducted a training battle with Bran and the archers. Silently, she corrected their stance, their positioning. She showed them how to move behind the wall, how to change position after a volley, how not to stand in one spot. Bran listened. for the first time, without arguing. Hazel was a true warrior. Everyone could see it. She moved differently. She breathed differently. She stood differently. 3 days. Then she left. She said she'd be back, that she'd bring news, that she'd look for Princess Lyra. Aidan asked why he needed a princess. Hazel looked at him. She said a princess meant legitimacy. The chancellor holds the prince. If someone holds the princess, that's a second claim to the throne, a second center of power, an alternative. Aidan nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. Hazel left. Finn stood at the gate and watched her go. She said quietly that this one could be trusted. Aidan asked why. Finn said because she was tired, and tired people don't lie. They don't have the strength. Prin Lyra didn't come through Hazel, on her own, a month after Hazel left. Dirty, thin, in peasant clothes, her hair cut short, her face covered in dust, on foot, alone, 15 years old. She made it from the capital to Brynholt in 3 weeks, along roads where people are robbed and killed. A 15-year-old girl who grew up in a library. How she survived. Aidan found out later, through cunning, through wit, through book knowledge that turned out to be more useful than anyone thought. She knew geography. She knew which roads led where. She knew which villages belonged to which lords. She bypassed hostile territories. She spent the night in the woods. She ate berries and roots she remembered from the botany books in her father's library. Once she swam across a river. Once she hid in a haystack when the chancellor's patrol rode by on the road. She was frightened, exhausted, but alive. And in her eyes, as she stood before Aidan at the gates of Brynholt, there was something he recognized. Stubbornness, quiet, iron-willed. The stubbornness of a person who had decided not to die. Mara took her in, washed her, fed her, put her to bed. Lyra slept for a day. When she woke up, Aidan was sitting by the door. Mara was beside him. Lyra looked at them. She said she knew who he was, that Hazel had found her halfway there. She told them about Brynholt, about the healer, about the wall, about the town that had sprung up in a year on the empty shore. Hazel told her to come here. Lyra came. Aidan asked why. Lyra said that the chancellor wanted to marry her off to Prince Solgrand, that it wasn't a marriage, but a sale, that Solgrand would get the princess, and with her the right to the throne of Northwald. That after the wedding, Northwald would cease to exist. It would become a province of Solgrand. That she had run away because she refused to be a pawn. Aidan listened, 15 years old. At 15, this girl made a decision that changed the fate of the country. She ran away, alone. She made it. He asked what she wanted. Lyra paused. She said she wanted Northwald to survive, that she didn't want her brother to be a puppet, that she wanted to be useful, not a symbol, not a pawn. Useful. Aidan nodded. He stood up. He left. He returned an hour later. He brought her a stack of birch bark sheets, his notes, the first draft of an arithmetic textbook. A rough draft, with mistakes. He told her to read it, to find the mistakes. He said he wanted children to learn from it. Lyra took the sheets, looked at him. Huge eyes. No one in her life had ever given her a task. Everyone had given her a role. Princess, bride, symbol, a bargaining chip. But this man gave her birch bark sheets and told her to find the mistakes. She found 4 that evening. By morning, she had rewritten an entire chapter. Her handwriting was perfect. Her phrasing was precise, better than Aidan's. She was born for this. Not for the throne, for knowledge. Lyra lived under the name Lyra. Just Lyra. No title, no last name. The village didn't know who she was. Only Aidan knew. Mara, Hart, Selena, Finn, So-Yoon. Lyra became an assistant at the school. Selena taught the younger ones. Lyra taught the older ones. Arithmetic, reading, writing. She explained things like someone who had just learned them herself. Fresh, clear, without condescension. The children were drawn to her. She was closer to them in age, in energy, in the way her eyes lit up when she solved a problem on the blackboard. Selina watched. Once she told Aiden that the girl was talented. Aiden said he knew. Selina asked where she was from. Aiden remained silent. Selina looked at him, then at Lyra, then at him again. She said, "All right, when the time comes, you'll tell me." She left. Selina knew when not to ask if she saw that the answer was dangerous. Meanwhile, the world outside Brynholt's walls was growing more dangerous. Chancellor Storn was consolidating his power. His men controlled the capital. Taxes were rising. Villages were being ruined. Refugees were heading south, toward the sea, toward Brynholt. New people arrived every week. Families, artisans, former soldiers. By the end of the first year, 400 people lived in Brynholt. A school, a hospital, a soap factory, a blacksmith shop, a sawmill, smokehouses, a shipyard. Yes, a shipyard. Ijan began building ships, small ones, fishing boats, but with a proper keel, with watertight compartments, boats that wouldn't sink in a storm. The fishermen looked at them and couldn't believe it. The first boat set out to sea. It ran into a storm on the way back. A wave broke through the side. Water poured into the bow compartment and stopped. The bulkhead held. The boat didn't sink. It returned, intact, with a hold full of fish. From that day on, they stopped calling Ijan an outsider. They began to call him a master. Aiden stood on a hill above Brynholt. Early morning. Fog from the sea. Lights through the fog. 400 lights. 400 families. Houses. Streets. According to So-Yun's plan. Water supply. Sewer system. Soap factory. Blacksmith shop. A school. A hospital. A shipyard. A wall. New. Stone on a foundation. Tolben and 20 masons had been building for 2 months. Crossbowmen on the walls, 40, not 20. Bran was in command. Hazel came twice, taught, corrected, left. Aiden stood on the hill and looked at the city, because it was a city. Small, still dirty, unfinished, but a city. His city. No, not his. Theirs. Mara, who ran the soap factory and the hospital. Garth, who led people with the authority of 60 years of life. Tolben, who forged the best steel in Northwald. Selina, who knew every coin in the treasury and every sack of grain in the granary. Finn, who knew every trail in the district and every stranger within a day's journey. So-Yun, who planned every street. Ijona, who built ships. Lyra, who taught the children and copied textbooks. Brana, who commanded the archers. Connor, who forged alongside Tolben. Everyone. Each of them took a piece of his knowledge and turned it into a skill, into a craft, into life. He was a library. They became the hands. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. A week later, Hazel arrived, not alone, with 10 guards, loyal to the crown. She said the Chancellor had learned of Lyra, that he was looking for her, that his men were on her trail, that Brynholt might become a target. Not because of soap or steel, because of the princess. Aiden convened a council, Brynholt's first formal council. Garth, Mara, Selina, Tolben, Bran, Finn, So-Yun, Ajon, Lyra, Hazel. 10 people. In Hart's house. By the hearth. Aiden explained the situation. The Chancellor is coming. Not the Baron, the Chancellor. He has an army, a real one, with knights, with siege engines, with battering rams. Brynholt's wall won't hold. Crossbows won't stop them. Silence. Bran said they would fight. Tolben nodded. Hazel shook her head. She said fighting the Chancellor's army was suicide. We need politics. We need allies. Finn said the Chancellor's enemies, the nobles he's fleeced, the cities he's strangled with taxes, the trading houses he's squeezed out. If we unite them. Selina said we need money. Allies cost money. War costs money. So Yoon said we need time, that the Chancellor won't move in winter, maybe in spring. 4 months. Lyra was silent. Then she said she would write to her brother, that the prince didn't want to be a puppet, that if he received a letter from his sister, with proof that there was an alternative, that there was a place where he was welcome, he could escape. Or he could start resisting from within. Everyone looked at her. A 15-year-old girl had just proposed a political operation on the scale of a coup d'etat. Aiden looked at Lyra. She was no longer a child. The winter of the second year was different. Not survival. Preparation. Aiden divided up the tasks. Hazel took charge of the army. She reorganized the garrison. 40 crossbowmen, 10 of her guards with swords and spears, 20 militiamen with new shields made of Tolban steel, 70 fighters. For a town of 400 people, that was a lot. 1 in 7 adult men. But Hazel said it couldn't be any fewer. What if the Chancellor came with 300? 70 behind the wall with crossbows and fortifications could hold out for a week. A week is time. Time for negotiations, for allies to arrive, for a miracle. Aiden didn't believe in miracles. He believed in preparation. Finn worked like a shadow. She left for a week. She returned with information. The Chancellor is gathering forces, but slowly. Solgrand is creating a diversion. Skirmishes on the southern border. Solgrand's intelligence is probing the defenses. The Chancellor is forced to keep troops in the south. This gave Brynholt time. Finn brought back more than just military news. She found contacts. House of Velmar. Merchants who hated the Chancellor for his tariffs. One of them, an old fox named Merton Halls. He was willing to talk. Aiden sent Selina. He didn't go himself. He sent Selina. She knew etiquette, knew how to talk to merchants, knew the numbers. Selina traveled for 2 days, met with Halls. 3 hours of negotiations, returned with a contract. The Velmar trading house would buy Brynholt's soap and steel, on a regular basis, at a fixed price. Plus, Hall's house will support Brynholt's status as a free settlement, if Aiden grants them the exclusive right to resell soap in Velmar. Aiden read the contract. He looked at Selina. He said she had just concluded the first international trade deal in Brynholt's history. Selina shrugged. She said that the Counts de Vere had been taught how to do business. Then she quietly added that the Counts de Vere had been taught many things. It was a pity that she had been taught only music. She paused. She said she had taught herself the rest. Here. Aiden nodded. He didn't add anything. Some things didn't need words. Lyra's letter reached the prince. Finn had delivered it. How she delivered it, Aiden didn't ask. Finn knew the ins and outs that even the guards didn't know. The reply came 3 weeks later, brief, shaky handwriting. The prince wrote that he was afraid, that the Chancellor was watching, that he couldn't run, but that he believed Lyra, and that if Lyra said there was hope, he would wait. Lyra read the letter, folded it, put it away. Her face didn't change, but her hands were shaking. She was a child who had been forced to grow up, and it was unfair. Aiden knew it was unfair, and he knew there was nothing he could do about it. Only give her a job, a purpose, a meaning. So she wouldn't have time to think about how she was 15 years old and the world was demanding decisions of her that adults were afraid to make. The Order of the Ashes. Aiden learned about them at the end of his second year. Sebastian Kale, a monk, tall, thin, shaven head, eyes like 2 pieces of ice. He came to Brynholt to preach, alone, unarmed, in the robe of a monk of the One Light. He preached in the square. He spoke of the sin of pride, about people who place themselves above God's providence, about knowledge being a temptation, about how illness is sent by God and to cure it is to go against His will. People listened. Some nodded. Bridget nodded more vigorously than anyone else. Aidan stood to the side. He listened. He watched. His mind was working. This monk was not just a preacher. He was a scout. His eyes weren't praying. His eyes were counting. Houses, people, walls, workshops. He was memorizing, just as Aidan memorized, only with a different purpose. After the sermon, the monk asked to see the healer. Aidan received him, at Garth's house, in front of witnesses. Garth, Mara, Finn in the shadows by the wall. Sebastian Cale sat down, refused food, refused drink, looked at Aidan, asked where his knowledge came from. Aidan gave the usual answer. He studied, far away, for a long time. The monk smiled, subtle, cold. He said he knew another answer. He said that over 800 years, the Order of the Ashes had seen 7 like Aidan. People who knew what they could not know. People who came from nowhere and carried knowledge that shattered the order of the world. The Order called them the Burning Ones, because they burned brightly, and because they all burned, all 7 of them, dead, some by the sword, some by poison, some by the fire. Aidan listened. His face remained unchanged. Inside, cold, not fear, understanding. They had found him. A structure with 800 years of memory, one that killed those like him, regularly, methodically, for centuries. Sebastian Cale stood up, said he'd just come to take a look for now, that he'd be back, that Aidan should think about whether he wanted to burn. He left, drove off. Finn watched him go, said the monk was more dangerous than the Baron, more dangerous than the Chancellor, because the Baron wanted to take, the Chancellor wants to control, and the monk wants to destroy. Aidan nodded. Finn was right. Aidan hadn't slept for 3 nights after Cale's visit. He thought. The Order of the Ashes, 800 years, 7 strangers before him, all dead, all knew too much. All tried to change the world. All were stopped. By someone who believed that knowledge is dangerous, that the world must remain as it is, that progress is a sin. Aidan lay in the darkness and listened to Mara's breathing. She was sleeping by the hearth. Just like on the first day, just like always. He listened to her breathing and thought about how the 7 people before him had tried to do what he was doing, and all of them died, and that he was the 8th, perhaps the last, or perhaps the first to survive. Because those 7 didn't have Brynholt. They didn't have the wall. They didn't have crossbows. They didn't have Mara. They didn't have Garth. They didn't have people who stood behind him not because he ordered them to, but because he taught them to stand up for themselves. Spring came early. The snow melted in early March. The streams swelled. The roads turned into rivers of mud, and people walked along those rivers, toward Brynholt. Refugees from the northern villages. The Chancellor tripled the taxes. He took the grain, he took the livestock. He took the young men into the army. The villages were dying. People were fleeing. To the sea. To the city where they don't take the last of what you have. Where they feed you. Where they treat you. Where they were welcomed. In a single month, Brynholt's population grew to 800. So Yun redrew the plan. New neighborhoods, a new wall, wider, higher, stone, with towers. Tolbin forged without stopping, Connor by his side. 3 more apprentices. The smithy became a workshop. 5 forges, 10 hammers. The steel went into crossbows, into tools, for nails, for hinges, for knives, for sickles, for plows. Brynholt was arming itself and building at the same time. A printing press. Aidan had been working on it for 2 months, the simplest kind. A wooden screw press. Lead type. They found the lead in the hills behind the village. A small vein. Enough. The letters were cast in clay molds. Mara helped. Her hands were more precise than those of blacksmiths. She carved the molds for the letters out of clay. Small, smooth, perfect. The first print. A page from an arithmetic textbook. The very one Lyra had started. Ink made of soot and oil. Paper made of scraps, crumpled, gray, but paper, with letters, with numbers. Lyra held the first print. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, from the realization. She had copied that page by hand 20 times, for 20 students. Each copy took a day. Now, one print, 1 minute, 20 copies an hour. Lyra pressed the sheet to her chest. She said quietly that this changed everything. Aiden nodded. It changed everything. Knowledge was no longer dependent on a single hand, a single voice, a single memory. Knowledge became reproducible, like soap, like steel, like a water pipe, only infinitely more powerful. Hazel arrived, not with 10 guards, with 50, fully armed. She had gone over to Brynholt's side, openly. She burned her bridges. She said the Chancellor had declared her a traitor, that her people, those still loyal to the crown, had followed her, that the remaining guards in the capital were under the Chancellor's command, that the prince is effectively a prisoner, that Solgrand has begun moving toward the border, that there will be war by summer, that if Northwall doesn't unite now, it won't exist by fall. Aiden convened a council, the second one, an expanded one. All the key figures, plus the elders from Calston and the other villages that have joined. 30 people in the great hall they had built a month ago. The first council hall, with a long table, with chairs, with a map of Northwall drawn by Ejon, detailed, accurate, with every road, every fortress, every river. Aiden stood before the map. He spoke, quietly, calmly, as always. He explained the situation. Solgrand is advancing from the south, 15,000, heavy infantry, cavalry, siege engines. The Chancellor can field 8,000 if he turns toward the border, but the Chancellor won't turn, because if he turns toward the border, the capital will be left unprotected. And then, someone could enter the capital and free the prince. The Chancellor knows this. That's why he's torn. Hold the capital or defend the border. That's his weakness. And that's Brynholt's chance. Hazel stood by the map. She pointed out positions, garrisons, routes. She knew the Northwalled army from the inside, every commander, every fortress, every weak spot. Together, they drew up a plan, not purely military, logistical, medical, engineering. Brynholt cannot field an army. Brynholt has 120 fighters. That is not enough for a field battle. But Brynholt can do something else. Secure the rear, a hospital, supplies, weapons, crossbows, steel, soap for the hospitals, clean water for the camps, bandages, medics. Mara trained 20 women, 20 field medics, with soap and bandages and the knowledge that dirty hands kill. That was more than the entire medical corps of the Northwalled army combined. Aiden proposed a plan. Brynholt sends a supply train to the army, with medics, with supplies, with crossbows, 100 crossbows. Tolbin and his workshop had been working all winter. 100 crossbows meant 200 hands capable of shooting through chainmail. That shifted the balance. Infantrymen with crossbows against Solgrand's heavy cavalry. Plus, engineering fortifications, moats, pikes, catapults, everything that had worked at the walls of Brynholt, only on a battlefield scale. Hazel listened, nodded, added, corrected. They worked together, like two gears of a single machine. He knew the theory. She knew the practice. He calculated. She sensed. The plan was born in 3 days. Not perfect. No plan is perfect, but workable. And most importantly, realistic, feasible with the people and resources they had. The supply train set out at the end of the month. 20 wagons, medics, supplies, crossbows, steel, soap, bandages, medicine, tools for digging fortifications. Brand commanded the guard, 40 fighters. Mara rode with the medics. Aiden didn't want to let her go. Mara looked at him. She said quietly that she was the best medic in Northwald, that without her, soldiers would die from wounds that could have been stitched up, from diarrhea that could have been stopped, from a fever that could have been brought down. Aiden was silent. She was right. He knew she was right. And he knew that if she didn't come back, he didn't finish that thought, not even in his head. Mara stood before him, gray eyes, quiet, strong. She said she would return. He nodded. She turned and walked toward the wagon. She stopped. Without turning around, she said that enough soap had been made to last a month, that 3 women knew the recipe, that the hospital would function without her, that she had taken care of everything. Aiden stood and watched as the wagon train drove down the road. Dust, the creaking of wheels, and Mara on the front wagon, small, upright, with a bag of medicine on her lap. Brynholt stayed. Aiden stayed. With Selena, with Lyra, with So-Yun, with Ejong, with Tolbin, with Finn, with Garth, with the 400 people who had gone, waiting for news, waiting for the outcome. The war was raging somewhere in the south. Messengers came every 3 days. The Chancellor's army and the troops loyal to the crown had united. They had been forced to. Solgrand was at the gates. Hazel led the guard to the army. Brynholt's crossbows were distributed to the infantry. Mara's medics took up positions in the rear. The Battle of Horn Pass. A messenger arrived at dawn. Aiden stood at the gates. The messenger fell from his horse. He said 2 words. We won. Victory. Not a clean one, not easy, bloody. A 2-day battle in a narrow pass. The Solgrand cavalry ran into the ditches and slingshots set up according to Brynholt's method. The crossbows pierced the chainmail. The medics saved the wounded. Soap and clean water kept the fever at bay in the camp. Northwald's losses were heavy, but Solgrand retreated. For the first time in 3 years, he retreated. He did not win. He retreated. Northwald held out. Among the messages was a single line from Hazel. Mara is alive. She's working. She hasn't slept for 3 days. Aiden read it and sat down on a step by the gate. He sat there, stared at the sky, breathed. Selena approached, sat down beside him, silently. So-Yun approached, sat down on the other side, silently. Lyra stood in the doorway. Finn was on the wall. Garth was by the well. Everyone was silent. Everyone knew Northwald had survived, and part of that victory belonged to them, to Brynholt, to soap and steel and crossbows and the woman with gray eyes who had been sewing up wounds for 3 days without sleep. 3 weeks later, the prince arrived in Brynholt. A winter night, a blizzard, 10 guards, on horseback. A 16-year-old boy with a golden circlet on his head. He dismounted at Aiden's house. He went inside. Everyone was there. Mara had returned 2 days earlier, thin, with dark circles under her eyes, but alive. She stood by the hearth. Selena at the door. Finn on the beam under the ceiling. Hazel in the corner in full armor. Lyra in the doorway, pale, teary eyes. So-Yun by the window, holding a lamp. The prince took off his crown, placed it on the table in front of Aiden. His voice broke. He said he couldn't do it, that Solgrand would return in 3 months, that the advisors were traitors, the generals had been bought off, that his sister Lyra said Aiden could save Northwald. He asked her to take the crown, to take Lyra as his wife, to take the throne, to take everything, just to save it. Silence. The fire crackled in the hearth, the wind howled outside the walls, snow pelted against the windows. Aiden looked at the crown, a golden band on a rough wooden table. a symbol of power in a country that was dying. He looked up. His gaze swept the room. Mara by the hearth, a cup of herbal tea in her hand. Forgotten, eyes gray, quiet, waiting. Selina by the door, her hand on the hilt of the sword Aiden had taught her to carry. Her back straight, her face calm. The countess who became an accountant, who became a teacher, who became something greater than all of that combined. Finn on the beam, like a cat, dark eyes gleaming, a knife in her hand, not threateningly, out of habit. She no longer slept with a knife out of fear. She slept with a knife because it was hers. Hazel in the corner, full armor, face inscrutable, hands on her belt, a soldier to her fingertips, exhausted to the very limit. But she stood, because standing was all she knew how to do, and all that was needed. Lyra in the doorway, 16, pale, eyes wet. She knew. She had asked her brother to do this. She had brought him here. She believed this man could do it. So Yoon by the window, a lamp in her hand. Light fell on her face, calm, distant, as if she were calculating something inside. Probabilities, outcomes, options, as always. Aiden stared at the crown for a long time. Then he looked up at the prince and spoke, quietly, slowly, like a man who had finally found the words. He said he wouldn't take the crown, that the crown was poor engineering, too much power on one head. He said he would take something else, a commitment, that in 10 years, Northwald would be a country where not a single child would die of dysentery, not a single one. That in return, he asks not for the throne, he asks for the right to teach, the right to build, the right to gather people and impart knowledge to them. If the prince grants this, he will save the country. If he does not, he will save it anyway. But it will take longer, and it will be bloodier. The prince wept. He nodded. He picked up the crown. He put it on, crookedly. He held out his hand. Aiden shook it. The boy's hand in the hand of a man who knew how civilization was built. Snow was falling outside the window. Inside, 6 women stood in silence. Each understood the same thing in her own way. This man did not belong to them. He belonged to something they had all built together since the day a dirty gray bar of soap had fallen into the palm of a woman with cracked hands. Mara, Selina, Finn, Hazel, Lyra, So-Yoon. They were part of this, from the very beginning. And they knew that this was only the beginning, that tomorrow would be a new day, and a new task, and a new wall to build, and that Aiden would stand and speak, and they would do, as always. Because knowledge without hands is useless, and hands without knowledge are blind. But together they could do anything. Finn sat on a beam and looked down, at the man who had bought her out of the gallows a year ago, at these people who had become something she had never had. She quietly said one sentence. She said that he wasn't building a country, that he was building a home for all of them and calling it a country. Aiden looked up. He looked at her, and for the first time in all his time in this world, he smiled so that it reached his eyes. Lights were burning beyond the walls of Brynholt. 800 lights in the night. A city by the sea. The first city of the new world. Snow was falling, quietly, evenly, like a blank sheet of paper on which you can write anything. The 9th month brought a ship, a small junk with a gaff sail and a flat bottom. It appeared off the shore at dawn. A sentry on the wall shouted. People poured onto the shore. No one had ever seen a ship like this. A high stern, carved sides, the hull divided into compartments by internal walls. A rowboat was lowered from the junk. 2 people. A man of about 50. He was limping. His left leg was bandaged. A woman of about 25, black-haired, dark eyes, high cheekbones, skin the color of tea with milk. A wooden abacus with bone beads hung from her belt. She held it like a warrior holds a sword, habitually, as if it were a part of her. Garth stepped forward to meet them, hand on his belt. Not hostile, alert. The man bowed, deeply, formally. His accent was heavy, but he knew the language. He said his name was Ejon Rhee, that he was a cartographer from the kingdom of Joseon, far to the east, beyond 2 oceans. A storm had wrecked his expedition off the coast of Velmar. The crew had perished. Only he and his daughter remained. They spent 2 months repairing the ship. They were heading south, looking for a place. They'd heard of a village that took in strangers. They came. Hart looked at Aiden. Aiden stood behind him, staring at the junk. His mind was buzzing. Joseon, the equivalent of Korea. A junk with watertight bulkheads. If one compartment is breached, the ship doesn't sink. Europe would learn this principle 400 years later, but here, now, on its shore. He stepped forward. He bowed to Ejon just as deeply. Ejon was surprised. Here, they didn't bow like that to strangers with different faces. Aiden asked about the compartments in the hull. Ejon froze. His eyes instantly sharpened. He asked how Aiden knew. Aiden said he knew a lot, and that he'd like to learn more. Ejon was silent for a second. Then he smiled. He said that in 2 years in Arcadia, this was the first time someone had asked him a smart question. His daughter stood nearby. She looked at A. She didn't say anything, but her hand on the abacus relaxed slightly. Ejon Rhee and So-Yun stayed in Brynholt. Aiden gave them one of the new houses, with a chimney, with glass windows, cloudy, greenish, but transparent. Aiden had learned to make the simplest kind of glass 2 months ago. Sand, ash, high heat. Ejon touched the glass. He said that in Joseon they use oiled paper, that they know about glass but make very little of it. Aiden nodded. Their first conversation lasted 6 hours. They sat in Garth's house and talked. Ejon talked about navigating by the stars, about the compass, about gunpowder. Joseon knew gunpowder. They used it in fireworks and in primitive cannons. Aiden listened eagerly. Then Ejon started talking about medicine, about variolation, smallpox inoculation. Aiden leaned forward. Smallpox in Arcadia killed thousands, once a generation. Joseon knew how to protect themselves. Pus from a mild smallpox boil. Dry it, grind it, blow it into the nose of a healthy person. A mild illness. 2 days of fever, then lifelong protection. Aiden knew the principle, but he didn't know the details. Ejon knew. His wife had died of smallpox. After that, he studied the method. He inoculated his daughter. He inoculated himself. They survived. Aiden sat there and realized that before him was a man worth as much as all of Brynholt. So, Yoon didn't open up right away. She was silent the first few days. She counted on an abacus, quietly, quickly. The beads flew beneath her fingers. Aiden asked what she was counting. So-Yoon looked up. She said she was calculating the house, the area of the walls, the amount of wood needed, the population density, the distance between houses to prevent fires. Aiden stared at her. She was doing urban planning calculations, in her head, on her fingers, just because she was curious. He asked who had taught her. So-Yoon said her mother. Her mother was a mathematician, the best in their town. Aiden turned to Ijong. Ijong shrugged. He said that in Joseon, some women do calculations, and that So-Yoon calculates better than he does. Aiden told So-Yoon that Brynholt was growing, that it would soon be a city, and that the city needed a plan. Streets, neighborhoods, water supply, sewer system, a port. So-Yoon was silent. Then she said that in Joseon, she had been an interesting curiosity, a clever daughter. Here, She was a stranger with a foreign face. No one saw her mind. They saw her eyes. Narrow, unfathomable, frightening. Aiden said that he saw. So-Yun nodded. Exactly. Briefly, like the click of a bead. Selena greeted So-Yun coldly. Two women with numbers. Territory. But Aiden divided their tasks. Selena manages the past and the present. Incoming. Outgoing. What is there? So-Yun plans the future. What will be? Where to build? How much is needed? Selena accepted this a week later. When she saw So-Yun for the placement of new houses, each was positioned so that smoke from the forges wouldn't drift toward the residential buildings. The distances were precise to prevent fires. The water supply branched out based on logic, not convenience. Selena looked at So-Yun. She said the calculations were good. So-Yun nodded. She said that Selena's calculations were good too. A world without words. Through numbers. By the end of the 10th month, So-Yun had drawn the first plan of Brynholt as a city. On a large piece of birch bark, streets, neighborhoods, market, port, school, a hospital, workshops. Aiden stood over this drawing and his breath caught in his throat. For the first time, he saw the future drawn by someone else's hand, and that hand was more precise than his own. Meanwhile, Ejon began building boats. Small ones, fishing boats, but with a proper keel and watertight bulkheads. The first one set out to sea. It ran into a storm. A wave smashed through the side. Water gushed into the bow compartment and stopped. The bulkhead held. The boat didn't sink. It returned intact, with a hold full of fish. The fishermen stood on the shore and watched, silently. Then, one by one, they approached Iona. They didn't bow. They shook her hand. In the fishermen's language, that meant more than any bow. From that day on, they stopped calling Iona an outsider. They began to call her a master. So-Yun stood next to her father. She didn't smile, but the beads on her rosary clicked. Quiet, as if she had recorded that moment. The 11th month. Baron Halder Grimm died. Not in battle, not from illness. Drunk, he fell from his horse on the way back from the tavern, broke his neck. Finn brought the news at dawn. She burst into Garth's house. She said 2 words. Grimm is dead. Silence. Then Bran cursed. Then everyone spoke at once. Aiden was silent. He was thinking. The Baron's death changed the situation. Grimm had no heir. His lands, 4 villages, and Brynholt, formally. Everything would pass directly to Chancellor Storn. No buffer, no petty tyrant between them and the great tyrant. It was both worse and better. Worse because the Chancellor was smarter and more dangerous. He had an army, a real one. Better because the Chancellor had no time. The king was ill, the heir was weak. Solgrand on the southern border. The Chancellor was playing high-stakes politics. A fishing village at the edge of the world wasn't his priority. Not yet. Aiden told Garth they had a window, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, and that every day counted. Construction picked up speed. Brynholt was growing. According to So-Yun's plan, new houses, new workshops, a sawmill by the stream, a water wheel, Aiden's idea, Tolbin's creation. The wheel turned from the flow of water. It turned the shaft. The shaft drove the saw through a system of gears. A log was placed on the frame. The saw moved back and forth. The boards came out even, identical. In a single day, the wheel produced as many boards as 5 men could in a week. People stood and watched. Water worked instead of man. Bridget crossed herself. The others were silent. They watched. And something was changing in their minds. Quietly. Irreversibly. A world where water can saw wood is not the world into which they were born. It is a different world. And they stood on its threshold. The school opened in the 12th week of the 11th month. A small house, 1 room, benches, a blackboard made of planed birch, chalk made of burnt limestone. Selina became the first teacher. Aidan came to her. He said there were 43 children in Brynholt. Not a single one could read. Not a single one could count past 10. He said that could be changed. Selina looked at him. She said she was an accountant, not a teacher. Aidan said that an accountant is someone who knows letters and numbers, and a teacher is an accountant who shares.